A single eruption erased summers, toppled empires, and sparked new worlds. How can nature's sudden fury rewrite the destiny of all humanity? Picture yourself in 1815 when Mount Tambora in Indonesia unleashed the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history. The volcanic ash circled the globe, creating spectacular sunsets, but blocking sunlight for months. Crops failed across the northern hemisphere, leading to the worst famine of the 19th century. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein during this gloomy summer, while thousands of New Englanders packed up and headed west, founding new settlements. The gentle patter of ash falling like snow, the whispered prayers in empty fields, the quiet determination of families starting over. One eruption in a distant land reshaped literature, migration, and the very rhythm of seasons. What dreams emerge when nature forces humanity to reimagine tomorrow? You're walking through Boston's North End on a warm January afternoon in 1919 when suddenly the impossible happens. A massive tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses bursts, sending a sticky tsunami through the streets at 35 miles per hour. The sweet, thick wave demolished buildings, trapped horses, and claimed 21 lives in what became known as the Great Molasses Flood. You can almost hear the deep rumble as the wave approached, the startled cries of workers, the eerie silence afterward. This bizarre disaster led to stricter building codes and engineering standards across America. The molasses took weeks to clean up, and residents claimed they could smell sweetness in the air for decades. Local firefighters hosed down the harbor for months, turning Boston's waters temporarily brown. The gentle lapping of sticky waves, the patient work of cleanup crews, the community coming together after nature's strangest prank. How do we find meaning in the moments when reality becomes more surreal than fiction? Dear listeners, close your eyes and imagine yourself in medieval Strasbourg in 1518, where something extraordinary and terrifying began with a single woman dancing in the street. Frau Trophea started dancing and couldn't stop, and within days, hundreds of citizens joined her in this mysterious compulsion. The gentle cobblestones echoed with endless footsteps as people danced themselves to exhaustion, some reportedly dancing themselves to death. Authorities hired musicians, believing more music would cure the affliction. Modern theories suggest ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, or mass psychogenic illness triggered by social stress and religious fervor. The soft shuffle of worn shoes on stone, the wheeze of exhausted breath, the haunting melodies that offered no relief. This epidemic of dancing revealed how environmental factors and collective psychology could override individual will. The plague eventually faded as mysteriously as it began, leaving behind questions about the invisible threads connecting mind, body, and community. What invisible forces move through our lives, waiting for the right moment to make us dance? You're drifting back through time to humanity's darkest hour, when Lake Toba in Sumatra erupted with the force of several million atomic bombs. This supervolcanic explosion 74,000 years ago nearly ended our species before it truly began. The eruption launched ash and sulfur into the atmosphere, creating a volcanic winter that lasted 6 to 10 years. Global temperatures dropped dramatically, and genetic evidence suggests human populations crashed to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 breeding pairs. You can imagine the endless twilight, the bitter cold, the small bands of our ancestors huddled around precious fires. This catastrophic bottleneck shaped human genetics forever, making us one of the least genetically diverse species on Earth. The whispered stories around dying embers, the careful sharing of scarce food, the quiet determination that carried our species through its loneliest epoch. Those few survivors became the ancestors of everyone alive today. What strength sleeps within us, inherited from those who refused to surrender to an endless winter? In 1859, the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history struck Earth, creating auroras so bright that people could read newspapers by their light as far south as the Caribbean. Telegraph systems worldwide went haywire, with some operators receiving electric shocks and telegraph paper catching fire. Remarkably, some telegraph lines worked better without their power sources, drawing energy directly from the aurora-charged atmosphere. You can almost hear the crackling of overloaded wires, see the ethereal green light dancing across unexpected skies, feel the wonder and terror of a world suddenly disconnected. The Carrington event revealed humanity's growing dependence on technology and our vulnerability to space weather. Messages traveled by horseback once again, reminding people of simpler times. The gentle whisper of solar wind, the patient rebuilding of communication networks, the humbling reminder that we share our planet with forces beyond our control. What would we rediscover about ourselves if the sun decided to remind us who's really in charge? You're standing in the dusty badlands of the American West in the 1870s, where two brilliant paleontologists turned scientific discovery into an epic rivalry that captivated the nation. Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope began as colleagues, but became bitter enemies in their race to discover and name new dinosaur species. Their feud, known as the Bone Wars, involved bribery, theft, dynamiting of fossil sites, and even armed fossil hunters. You can hear the gentle scrape of brushes against ancient bone, the whispered arguments over classification, the rumble of wagons carrying prehistoric treasures back east. This scientific war actually accelerated paleontology, leading to the discovery of over 130 dinosaur species and establishing America as a leader in prehistoric research. The rivalry also highlighted how scientific progress sometimes emerges from very human emotions like pride, jealousy, and ambition. The soft desert wind carrying stories of ancient worlds, the patient work of reconstruction, the wonder of holding creatures that walked the earth millions of years ago. What discoveries await when human passion meets the patient secrets buried in stone? In 1932, approximately 20,000 emus invaded agricultural areas in Western Australia, destroying crops and threatening farmers' livelihoods. The government deployed soldiers with machine guns in what became known as the Great Emu War. The emus proved remarkably tactical, scattering when attacked and regrouping elsewhere, making them nearly impossible targets. After several weeks and thousands of rounds of ammunition, the military admitted defeat and withdrew. You can almost hear the thunder of emu feet across the plains, the frustrated shouts of soldiers, the gentle rustling of wheat being devoured by determined birds. This environmental conflict highlighted the challenges of balancing human settlement with native wildlife needs. The emus had simply followed ancient migration patterns, unaware they were now trespassing on farmland. The soft whoosh of wings taking flight, the patient adaptation of farming techniques, the humor that emerges when nature's logic trumps human strategy. What wisdom might we learn from creatures who refuse to acknowledge the boundaries we create? You're in the remote Siberian wilderness on June 30th, 1908, when suddenly the sky explodes with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs, flattening 2,000 square kilometers of forest, yet leaving no crater. The Tunguska event remains one of Earth's greatest mysteries, likely caused by an asteroid or comet that disintegrated in the atmosphere. Seismic stations across Europe registered the blast, and the night sky glowed so brightly that people in London could read by its light. Indigenous Evenk people spoke of a fireball that split the sky, and for decades, the remote location kept scientists away from investigating. You can imagine the deafening roar echoing across endless taiga, the eerie silence afterward, the patient regrowth of a forest knocked flat like matchsticks. When expeditions finally reached the site, they found millions of trees lying in a radial pattern, but no impact crater. The gentle whisper of wind through recovering wilderness, the slow return of wildlife, the humbling reminder that space occasionally reaches down to touch our world. What other cosmic visitors pass by unnoticed, and what stories do the trees remember? The volcanic island of Krakatoa in Indonesia exploded with such force that the sound traveled around the Earth 4 times and was heard 3,000 miles away. The eruption triggered tsunamis over 100 feet high, destroying hundreds of coastal towns and claiming 36,000 lives. Global weather patterns changed for years afterward, creating spectacular sunsets that inspired artists worldwide. The explosion was so powerful that barometric readings jumped off their scales in weather stations across the globe. You can almost feel the earth trembling, hear the distant thunder that wouldn't stop, see skies painted in colors that had no names. Krakatoa essentially destroyed itself, leaving only a small remnant of the original island. The gentle lapping of waves where land once stood, the patient rebuilding of marine ecosystems, the artistic renaissance born from nature's most violent canvas. How do we measure the beauty that sometimes emerges from devastation beyond our comprehension? You're witnessing humanity's first encounter with space weather as a technological threat, when the great solar storm of September 1859 turned the night sky into day across the entire northern hemisphere. Telegraph operators in Boston received electric shocks, while others in Portland continued working by unplugging their power supplies and running their systems solely on auroral energy. Some telegraph wires sparked and caught fire, yet messages traveled faster than ever before on lines powered purely by the storm itself. You can hear the crackling of overcharged circuits, see the ethereal green curtains dancing where they'd never appeared before. Feel the wonder of a world suddenly reminded of its cosmic neighborhood. This event marked the beginning of our understanding that Earth exists within the sun's extended atmosphere. Gold miners in the Rocky Mountains woke thinking it was dawn, while ships' compasses spun wildly off course. The gentle hum of charged particles streaming past our planet, the patient adaptation of early electrical systems, the humbling realization that technology makes us both more powerful and more vulnerable. What other invisible storms wait patiently in space, ready to remind us how connected everything truly is? You're bundling up in your warmest blankets as we journey to a time when winters were so fierce that the Thames River in London regularly froze solid enough to hold entire festivals. From roughly 1300 to 1850, the Little Ice Age gripped the northern hemisphere, shortening growing seasons and transforming daily life across continents. Londoners built temporary shops and held ox roasts on the frozen Thames during spectacular frost fairs. The gentle crunch of footsteps on thick river ice, the cheerful calls of vendors selling hot pies, the wonder of walking where ships usually sailed. This climate shift helped trigger the Great Famine of 1315, contributed to the French Revolution through crop failures, and even influenced art as painters captured snow-covered landscapes that seemed eternal. Viking colonies in Greenland vanished as temperatures dropped and sea ice expanded. The patient adaptation of entire societies, the quiet resilience of communities facing longer winters, the slow recognition that Earth's climate dances to rhythms beyond human control. What stories would our rivers tell if they could remember the weight of winter festivals? Dear listeners, close your eyes and imagine the sky turning black at noon as millions of tons of topsoil rise into the air like a living wall of earth. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s transformed America's heartland into a moonscape, forcing the largest migration in United States history. Years of intensive farming had stripped away the prairie grasses that held soil together, and when drought arrived, the land simply blew away. Massive dust storms, called black blizzards, could travel hundreds of miles, burying entire towns and reaching as far as Washington, D.C. You can almost taste the grit in the air, hear the constant whisper of wind carrying away dreams, feel the determination of families loading everything they owned onto trucks headed west. This environmental catastrophe inspired new farming techniques, soil conservation programs, and the haunting photography of Dorothea Lange. The gentle rustle of replanted grasslands, the patient restoration of damaged ecosystems, the hard-won wisdom that treating land as commodity rather than partner carries devastating consequences. What seeds of resilience take root in the aftermath of our greatest environmental mistakes? You're walking through the marble corridors of Constantinople in 541 CE when the first cases of a mysterious plague arrive on grain ships from Egypt carrying more than wheat in their holds. The plague of Justinian became the first recorded pandemic, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people across the Byzantine Empire and beyond. This bubonic plague, carried by fleas on black rats, struck just as Emperor Justinian was attempting to reconquer the former Roman territories. The soft shuffle of funeral processions, the echo of prayers in half-empty churches, the quiet courage of those who tended the sick. Trade routes that once connected distant lands became pathways for invisible death, while economic systems that had flourished for centuries ground to a halt. The plague forced Justinian to abandon his military campaigns and fundamentally changed the balance of power between East and West. The gentle lapping of harbor waves against ships that would never return, the patient rebuilding of shattered communities, the sobering reminder that microscopic life can reshape the grandest human ambitions. How many empires have risen and fallen on the wings of creatures too small to see? Hey friends, let your mind drift back to a time when our planet decided to return to Ice Age conditions, just as it was warming up, creating one of the most dramatic climate reversals in Earth's history. The Younger Dryas period began suddenly around 12,900 years ago, plunging the northern hemisphere back into glacial conditions for over 1,000 years. Scientists believe this freeze was triggered by massive freshwater floods from melting glaciers that disrupted ocean currents. Early human societies had to completely reorganize their ways of life as forests disappeared and steppes returned. You can imagine the bewildering cold settling over communities that had known warming, the patient adaptation of hunting strategies, the quiet determination of people facing an uncertain future. This climate shift may have spurred the development of agriculture as people sought more reliable food sources. The gentle whisper of wind across newly frozen landscapes, the careful preservation of seeds through dark years, the profound resilience that helped our ancestors weather Earth's last great cooling. What wisdom about adaptability lies frozen in ice cores, waiting to teach us about navigating change? You're standing on the prosperous streets of Galveston, Texas in September 1900, when the deadliest natural disaster in American history approached as an unnamed hurricane from the Gulf of Mexico. Galveston was then the Wall Street of the South, a booming port city that considered itself unsinkable. The hurricane brought 15-foot storm surges that swept across the entire island, destroying over 3,600 buildings and claiming between 6,000 and 12,000 lives. You can almost hear the initial gentle patter of rain that became a roar, the crash of waves where streets once stood, the eerie silence that followed nature's fury. This catastrophe marked the end of Galveston's dominance as a major port, as business shifted to Houston. The disaster also led to America's first comprehensive hurricane warning system and revolutionary new approaches to coastal engineering. The soft sound of debris settling, the patient work of survivors clearing rubble, the quiet determination to rebuild while accepting nature's ultimate authority over human ambition. What hubris do we still carry that waits for the next storm to wash away? Dear listeners, settle into the story of how a distant volcanic eruption created the perfect conditions for Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein during history's most famous dark and stormy summer. Mount Tambora's 1815 eruption in Indonesia launched so much ash into the atmosphere that 1816 became known as the year without a summer across the northern hemisphere. Temperatures dropped dramatically, crops failed globally, and strange weather patterns persisted for years. Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, and their companions found themselves trapped indoors at Villa Diodati in Switzerland during what should have been a pleasant summer vacation. The constant patter of rain on windows, the flickering of candlelight against gloomy afternoons, the creative energy that emerged from confinement. This volcanic winter also triggered massive migration within the United States as New England farmers abandoned their failed crops and headed west. The gentle scratch of Mary's pen bringing monsters to life. The patient adaptation of entire ecosystems to altered sunlight. The remarkable way distant geological events can spark immediate human creativity. What masterpieces wait to be born in the quiet spaces between disaster and recovery? You're floating in ancient seas, 2.4 billion years ago, witnessing the most dramatic environmental change in Earth's history as tiny cyanobacteria begin producing a waste product that will transform everything: oxygen. This great oxygenation event was actually a catastrophe for most existing life, as oxygen was toxic to the anaerobic organisms that had dominated Earth for billions of years. The gentle bubble of photosynthesis, the slow accumulation of a gas that would become essential, the patient transformation of an entire planet's atmosphere. Most of Earth's original life forms went extinct in what scientists call the oxygen holocaust. But this crisis also enabled the evolution of complex life that could harness oxygen's chemical power. Iron in the oceans rusted away, creating the banded iron formations we see in rocks today. The soft whisper of chemical reactions that would enable everything from breathing to fire. The gradual shift from a purple-tinted world to one where blue skies became possible. The profound irony that life's waste product became its greatest gift. What other waste products of today might become tomorrow's essential resources? Hey friends, imagine the Mediterranean Sea completely evaporating, leaving behind a salt desert deeper than the Grand Canyon, and you'll begin to understand one of Earth's most dramatic transformations. Around 5.96 million years ago, tectonic movements closed the Strait of Gibraltar, cutting off the Mediterranean from the Atlantic Ocean. Within perhaps just 1,000 years, this ancient sea evaporated almost completely, leaving behind a landscape of salt flats, isolated hypersaline lakes, and deep canyons where water once flowed. You can almost see the blinding white expanse of crystallized salt, hear the whisper of wind across empty basins, feel the profound silence of a seafloor exposed to sky. Early human ancestors would have been able to walk from Spain to Morocco across dried seabeds. When Gibraltar reopened, the Atlantic rushed back in with waterfalls perhaps 1,000 times larger than Niagara Falls, refilling the entire Mediterranean in less than a century. The gentle patience of geological time, the sudden violence of waters returning home, the reminder that even seas we consider eternal are merely temporary features on a restless planet. What other familiar landscapes are simply paused between transformations we cannot imagine? You're huddled with one of the last few thousand humans on Earth 74,000 years ago as the Toba supervolcano in Sumatra erupts with unimaginable fury, nearly ending our species before we had truly begun. This catastrophic eruption triggered a volcanic winter that lasted 6 to 10 years, dropping global temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius and creating conditions that reduced human populations to perhaps as few as 3,000 to 10,000 breeding pairs. The genetic bottleneck created by this near-extinction event explains why humans today are remarkably similar genetically compared to other species. You can imagine the endless twilight under ash-darkened skies, the careful sharing of dwindling resources, the quiet determination that carried our ancestors through Earth's coldest years. Those survivors possessed whatever combination of intelligence, cooperation, and adaptability enabled them to outlast a planetary winter. The soft crackle of precious fires, the whispered stories that preserved knowledge, the profound resilience that became our species' greatest inheritance from those who refused to surrender to an endless night. What strength flows through our DNA from ancestors who chose survival over surrender? Dear listeners, drift back to around 1200 BCE when the interconnected world of the Late Bronze Age came crashing down in what archaeologists call one of history's greatest mysteries. A period of climate change, possibly triggered by volcanic activity, brought widespread drought and famine to the eastern Mediterranean. Great civilizations that had traded and corresponded for centuries, the Mycenaeans, Hittites, and others, collapsed almost simultaneously. The gentle whisper of wind through abandoned palaces, the echo of footsteps in empty marketplaces, the patient reclaiming of cities by desert sands. Sea peoples, possibly climate refugees themselves, swept across the region in waves of migration and conflict. Only Egypt and Assyria survived, though greatly weakened. This collapse led to a dark age that lasted several centuries, but also enabled the rise of new peoples, including the early Greeks, Phoenicians, and Israelites. The soft rustle of papyrus records that would never be written. The quiet resilience of survivors who built new societies from old ruins. The reminder that even the most sophisticated civilizations remain vulnerable to Earth's changing moods. What lessons about interconnectedness and fragility echo from civilizations that thought they were too advanced to fall? You're floating in the warm, shallow seas of the late Cretaceous period, watching massive marine reptiles glide beneath tropical waters, unaware that a mountain-sized asteroid is hurtling toward Earth at 20 kilometers per second. The Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago released energy equivalent to billions of atomic bombs, instantly vaporizing rock and creating a crater 180 kilometers wide in what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact threw debris into space that rained down as molten glass across the entire planet, igniting global wildfires and plunging Earth into darkness for months. You can imagine the initial flash brighter than the sun, the earthquake that circled the globe multiple times, the eerie twilight that followed as photosynthesis stopped worldwide. This cosmic collision eliminated non-avian dinosaurs and 75% of all species, but it also created the evolutionary opportunity that allowed mammals, including our distant ancestors, to diversify and eventually flourish. The gentle settling of impact dust across empty landscapes, the patient emergence of new life forms, the profound reminder that Earth shares its journey through space with countless wandering rocks. What other cosmic visitors wait in the darkness, carrying both destruction and possibility? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift back to Earth's darkest chapter, when volcanic activity in Siberia nearly sterilized our entire planet in the greatest mass extinction ever recorded. The Great Dying, as scientists call it, eliminated 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial life around 252 million years ago. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia pumped greenhouse gases and toxic compounds into the atmosphere for thousands of years. Ocean temperatures rose dramatically, oxygen levels plummeted, and hydrogen sulfide from bacteria poisoned both land and sea. You can almost feel the oppressive heat of those ancient summers, smell the sulfurous air that made breathing difficult, hear the silence where once diverse ecosystems had thrived. This near-total reset of life on Earth took millions of years to recover from, but it also cleared the evolutionary stage for the rise of dinosaurs and eventually led to the world we know today. The patient persistence of microscopic survivors, the slow rebuilding of food webs, the remarkable resilience that carried life through its closest brush with complete annihilation. What microscopic heroes in today's world carry the seeds of tomorrow's great recoveries? Hey friends, imagine witnessing the most spectacular waterfall in Earth's history as the Atlantic Ocean crashes through the Strait of Gibraltar to refill the completely dry Mediterranean basin. Around 5.3 million years ago, after the Mediterranean had been a salt desert for over 500,000 years, rising sea levels finally broke through the Gibraltar barrier. The Zanclean flood that followed was almost beyond comprehension. Water poured in at rates possibly 1,000 times greater than Niagara Falls, raising sea levels by 10 meters per day. You can almost hear the thunderous roar of infinite water finding its ancient home. Feel the ground trembling under the weight of rushing seas. witnessed the birth of islands as former mountain peaks disappeared beneath rising waves. This incredible deluge completely refilled the Mediterranean in perhaps less than a century, transforming the entire geography of southern Europe and northern Africa. Early human ancestors would have witnessed landscapes changing almost daily as water reclaimed territories that had been dry land for millennia. The gentle lapping of waves against newly submerged shores, the patient adjustment of climates to the restored sea, the awesome reminder that even our most familiar waters are temporary visitors to ever-changing lands. What other sleeping floods wait beneath our feet, dreaming of the day they'll reshape familiar shores? You're diving into ancient oceans 541 million years ago, when life decided to experiment with every possible body plan in what scientists call the most dramatic evolutionary event in Earth's history. The Cambrian explosion saw the rapid appearance of complex animals with shells, eyes, claws, and bizarre body forms that seem almost alien to our modern eyes. In just 25 million years, a geological instant, nature invented most of the major animal groups we know today, plus many strange forms that would later go extinct. You can imagine the gentle drift of the first compound eyes evolving to see, the soft scrape of shells forming for protection, the quiet innovation happening in every tidal pool and deep-sea trench. Trilobites developed sophisticated vision systems. Anomalocaridids became the ocean's first apex predators, and countless other creatures filled ecological niches that had never existed before. This explosion of diversity followed a rise in atmospheric oxygen and the evolution of predation, which may have driven an evolutionary arms race of unprecedented creativity. The patient accumulation of genetic innovations, the gentle competition that sparked endless variety, the remarkable proof that life's greatest leaps forward often happen in periods of environmental change. What explosion of creativity waits in tomorrow's oceans, ready to surprise us with forms we cannot yet imagine? Dear listeners, settle into the story of how the Mediterranean's disappearance, 5.96 million years ago, created some of the world's deepest river valleys in just a few thousand years. When the Mediterranean Sea evaporated during the Messinian salinity crisis, rivers across Europe suddenly found themselves flowing toward a basin thousands of meters lower than before. The Rhone, Nile, and other major rivers carved spectacular gorges as they rushed toward the dried seabed, creating canyons that rival the Grand Canyon in depth, but formed in a fraction of the time. You can almost hear the roar of ancient rivers cutting through solid rock. See the spray of waterfalls plunging into depths that had never known sunlight. Feel the patient persistence of water finding its way to the sea. When the Mediterranean refilled during the Zanclean flood, these deep canyons were drowned beneath returning waters, becoming the submarine valleys that fishermen and oceanographers discover today. The Nile had carved a canyon extending 200 kilometers inland from its current delta, while the Rhone created underwater gorges still visible on modern seafloor maps. The gentle persistence of rivers following gravity's call, the hidden landscapes beneath familiar waters, the reminder that dramatic change often leaves its signature in stone. What other hidden canyons sleep beneath the waves, holding stories of times when geography danced to different rhythms? Hey friends, imagine tiny floating ferns covering the entire Arctic Ocean and single-handedly changing Earth's climate from a steamy greenhouse to something recognizably modern. Around 49 million years ago, during the Middle Eocene, massive blooms of azala ferns in the Arctic Ocean pulled so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that global temperatures dropped dramatically. These remarkable plants, no bigger than your thumb, formed floating mats across the entire Arctic basin, which was then a freshwater lake surrounded by lush forests where polar bears now roam. You can picture the gentle rustle of countless small fronds, the soft splash of Arctic waters lapping against endless green carpets, the quiet revolution happening one microscopic photosynthetic reaction at a time. As these ferns died and sank to the seafloor, they locked away enormous amounts of carbon that had been heating the planet. This natural carbon sequestration helped trigger the long-term cooling trend that eventually led to our current ice age cycle. The patient work of countless tiny organisms, the gradual transformation of a tropical world into one where ice could exist at the poles, the profound reminder that sometimes the smallest actors create the biggest changes. What tiny heroes in today's ecosystems are quietly writing the next chapter of Earth's climate story? You're experiencing the most rapid global warming event in Earth's history, as temperatures spike by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius in just a few thousand years, 56 million years ago. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum transformed our planet into a greenhouse world where palm trees grew in Alaska and crocodiles basked in Arctic waters. Scientists believe this warming was triggered by massive volcanic activity that released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Tropical rainforests extended to the poles, while desert regions expanded across the middle latitudes, creating a world almost unrecognizable to modern eyes. You can imagine the gentle warmth of polar summers that never ended, the rustle of tropical vegetation where tundra should have been, the patient adaptation of early mammals to a radically altered world. This ancient global warming lasted about 200,000 years and coincided with the rapid diversification of early primates, horses, and other mammalian groups that would eventually lead to modern ecosystems. Ocean acidity increased dramatically as excess carbon dissolved into seawater, causing mass extinctions among marine organisms. The slow recovery took nearly 2 million years as natural processes gradually pulled excess carbon from the atmosphere. What lessons from this ancient greenhouse world whisper warnings about the pace of change our planet can absorb? Dear listeners, drift back to a time when Earth's protective magnetic shield weakened to just 5% of its normal strength, leaving our planet nearly defenseless against cosmic radiation and solar storms. The Reshaped geomagnetic excursion 41,000 years ago saw the magnetic poles wander across the globe before briefly reversing completely, creating a period of extreme vulnerability that may have influenced human evolution and extinction patterns. During this magnetic chaos, the northern lights would have danced across skies as far south as the equator, while cosmic radiation bombarded the atmosphere, creating new isotopes that scientists can still detect in ice cores and tree rings today. You can imagine the eerie beauty of auroras painting tropical nights in green and red, the whispered concerns of early humans watching familiar stars behave strangely, the quiet adaptation of all life to increased radiation levels. This magnetic instability may have contributed to the extinction of Neanderthals and Australian megafauna, while forcing early modern humans to seek shelter in caves and develop new survival strategies. The gentle flutter of the magnetic field finding its way home, the patient shielding that resumed as the poles stabilized, the profound reminder that Earth's invisible protections are as vital as its visible ones. What other invisible shields protect our daily lives, and how would we adapt if they flickered like ancient magnetic fields? You're floating in ancient oceans that have turned purple and toxic as one of Earth's most severe environmental crises unfolds 183 million years ago during the early Jurassic period. The Torsian Oceanic Anoxic event saw massive volcanic eruptions pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, warming the planet and removing oxygen from the world's oceans. Without oxygen, purple and green sulfur bacteria dominated the seas, producing hydrogen sulfide gas that poisoned both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. You can almost smell the rotten egg scent of hydrogen sulfide drifting across coastal regions, see the eerie purple sheen of bacterial mats covering once blue waters, hear the silence where diverse marine communities once thrived. This crisis lasted nearly 1 million years and caused major extinctions among marine reptiles, ammonites, and other sea creatures. However, it also created the conditions for one of geology's greatest gifts to humanity: Many of the world's richest oil deposits formed from organic matter that accumulated in these oxygen-starved seas. The patient burial of ancient organisms in airless sediments. The slow transformation of death into the energy that would later power human civilization. The ironic connection between ancient environmental collapse and modern prosperity. What gifts might today's environmental challenges be preparing for civilizations we cannot yet imagine? Hey friends, let your mind wander to the Indian subcontinent 66 million years ago, when massive volcanic eruptions covered an area the size of modern India with lava flows over a kilometer thick in some places. The Deccan Traps eruptions began roughly 30,000 years before the Chicxulub asteroid impact and continued for another 500,000 years afterward, creating one of the largest volcanic features on Earth. These eruptions pumped enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere, contributing to the environmental chaos that ended the age of dinosaurs. You can imagine the gentle rumble of distant volcanoes that never seemed to stop, the red glow on the horizon that became a permanent feature of ancient skies, the patient accumulation of lava layer upon layer across an entire subcontinent. The volcanic gases caused acid rain, global warming, and ocean acidification, while the dust and aerosols blocked sunlight and disrupted photosynthesis worldwide. Modern India sits atop these ancient lava flows, and the rich soils derived from volcanic rock have supported some of the world's densest human populations for millennia. The soft whisper of monsoon rains on volcanic soils, the quiet fertility born from ancient destruction, the remarkable transformation of catastrophic landscapes into gardens that feed hundreds of millions. What other foundations of modern prosperity were forged in the fires of ancient catastrophes we've forgotten? You're standing on the pristine shores of Neolithic Europe when the largest underwater landslide in recorded history sends massive tsunamis racing across the North Sea at 200 kilometers per hour. The Storegga slide off Norway's coast displaced 3,500 cubic kilometers of sediment, roughly equivalent to moving all of Iceland into the ocean. This submarine avalanche created tsunamis up to 20 meters high that swept across Scotland, Denmark, and the North Sea basin, fundamentally altering the geography of northern Europe. You can almost hear the initial rumble from beneath the waves, feel the ground trembling as water rushed inland across vast coastal plains, witness entire Stone Age settlements vanishing beneath advancing walls of seawater. The slide completed the separation of Britain from continental Europe, transforming what had been a marshy lowland called Doggerland into the seafloor of the North Sea. Archaeological evidence suggests thriving Mesolithic communities were instantly drowned, their tools and hearths now resting on the ocean floor. The gentle lapping of waves over submerged forests, the patient sedimentation covering ancient human traces, the profound reminder that even stable-seeming continental shelves occasionally decide to rearrange themselves. What other sleeping giants rest beneath our familiar coastlines, waiting for their moment to reshape the map? Dear listeners, settle into the story of how a submarine volcano near Tonga created the largest explosion recorded in the modern era, injecting unprecedented amounts of water vapor into the stratosphere and temporarily altering global weather systems. The Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai eruption in January 2022 was heard across the Pacific, created atmospheric pressure waves that circled the Earth multiple times, and launched a plume of water vapor 58 kilometers into the sky. Unlike typical volcanic eruptions that cool the planet by blocking sunlight, this underwater explosion actually warmed the atmosphere by adding massive amounts of water vapor, Earth's most potent greenhouse gas. You can imagine the otherworldly roar traveling across ocean basins, the spectacular mushroom cloud visible from space, the gentle surprise of scientists discovering this eruption would temporarily accelerate rather than slow global warming. The explosion created tsunamis that reached coastlines thousands of kilometers away, while satellite imagery captured the perfect concentric circles of atmospheric shock waves expanding across the Pacific. The patient dispersal of volcanic water vapor through atmospheric currents, the subtle shifts in weather patterns worldwide, the reminder that our planet's most dramatic changes often begin in places we never see. What other hidden volcanic giants sleep beneath our oceans, ready to surprise us with effects we haven't yet imagined? Hey friends, imagine floods so massive they carved the Columbia River Gorge in just a few days and moved boulders the size of houses hundreds of miles downstream. During the last ice age, glacial ice dams repeatedly formed and failed across what is now Montana and Washington, creating the catastrophic Missoula floods between 15,000 and 13,000 years ago. Each time glacial Lake Missoula broke free, it released water volumes equivalent to 10 times the flow of all current world rivers combined, racing across the landscape at 100 kilometers per hour. You can almost hear the thunder of impossible water volumes carving through solid basalt. See house-sized boulders tumbling like pebbles in the current. Feel the patient persistence of floodwaters finding their way to the sea. These floods happened dozens of times, each one scouring the landscape and depositing enormous gravel bars that early settlers would mistake for ancient beaches. The channeled scablands of eastern Washington still bear the scars of these floods, with their distinctive pattern of giant ripple marks, abandoned waterfalls, and isolated rock pinnacles. The gentle whisper of wind through flood-carved canyons, the quiet testimony of landscapes shaped by forces beyond normal comprehension, the reminder that some of Earth's most beautiful features were born in moments of absolute chaos. What other impossible floods carved the familiar landscapes we walk through without recognizing their violent birth? You're drifting through ancient seas 445 million years ago, watching the first complex marine ecosystems collapse as Earth plunges into one of its most severe ice ages. The late Ordovician mass extinction eliminated roughly 85% of marine species when glaciers expanded across the supercontinent Gondwana, locking up so much water that sea levels dropped by 100 meters. Tropical shallow seas, the cradles of early complex life, drained completely, while the remaining deeper waters became cold and oxygen poor. You can imagine the gentle retreat of warm, life-rich waters, the patient advance of ice sheets across landscapes that had never known winter, the quiet disappearance of reef communities that had taken millions of years to evolve. This extinction was actually two events separated by about 1 million years, as life briefly recovered between glacial pulses only to face another round of environmental chaos. The trilobites, brachiopods, and early corals that dominated Ordovician seas faced conditions they had never encountered in their evolutionary history. The soft crackle of sea ice forming where tropical reefs once bloomed, the slow silence spreading through emptied ocean basins, the remarkable resilience of life that would eventually recover and try again with new forms and strategies. What lessons about adaptation echo from these ancient communities that learned too late about the power of changing ice? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift back to 1600 BCE, when the volcanic island of Thera erupted with such violence that it may have inspired Plato's legend of Atlantis, and definitely changed the balance of power in the ancient Mediterranean. The Minoan civilization on nearby Crete, Europe's first advanced society, was severely weakened by tsunamis and ashfall from this colossal eruption. The explosion was 4 times more powerful than Krakatoa, creating a caldera 12 kilometers wide and launching volcanic ash across the eastern Mediterranean. You can almost feel the ground trembling beneath Minoan palaces, hear the distant thunder that wouldn't stop, see the darkening skies that turned midday into twilight across the Aegean Sea. Archaeological evidence suggests the Minoans had some warning, as Akrotiri, their city on Thera, was evacuated before the final catastrophic explosion that buried it under meters of ash. This perfectly preserved Bronze Age city remained frozen in time until archaeologists uncovered it in the 1960s, revealing frescoes, pottery, and buildings that provide intimate glimpses into daily life 3,600 years ago. The gentle preservation of abandoned rooms beneath volcanic glass, the patient waiting of artifacts for their rediscovery, the profound connection between geological catastrophe and the birth of humanity's most enduring myths. What other lost civilizations sleep beneath layers of ash and time, waiting to tell us stories we thought were only legends? You're witnessing the most extreme climate events in Earth's history as our entire planet transforms into a giant ice ball, with glaciers extending from the poles to the equator and ice covering even tropical oceans. The Snowball Earth episodes between 750 and 635 million years ago saw global average temperatures drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius, creating conditions more hostile than modern Antarctica everywhere on Earth. These ice ages may have been triggered by massive volcanic eruptions that pulled too much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, allowing runaway cooling as white ice reflected sunlight back to space. You can imagine the eerie silence of ice sheets grinding across continents that had never known winter, the patient accumulation of snow where palm-like plants once swayed, the profound stillness of frozen oceans beneath skies that never warmed. Life survived these extreme conditions in ice-free refugia around volcanic hotspots and possibly beneath the ice itself, but the stress of global freezing may have triggered the evolution of the first complex cells with nuclei. When these ice ages finally ended due to volcanic carbon dioxide buildup, the rapid warming that followed saw explosive evolution that set the stage for all complex life on Earth. The gentle melting of impossible ice sheets, the sudden bloom of innovation in warming seas, the reminder that life's greatest leaps forward often follow its closest calls with extinction. What evolutionary treasures might be locked away in today's extremes, waiting for the right moment to reshape tomorrow? Hey friends, imagine the Mississippi River flowing backward for several hours, and church bells ringing by themselves in Boston as a series of massive earthquakes transforms America's frontier landscape. The New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 to 1812 were the most powerful seismic events in recorded North American history, with tremors felt across the entire eastern United States. The quakes were so powerful they created temporary waterfalls on the Mississippi, formed new lakes, and rang church bells over 1,000 miles away in cities along the Atlantic coast. You can almost hear the deep rumble that preceded each major shock. Feel the bewilderment of settlers who had never imagined the stable-seeming continent could shake so violently. Witness the Mississippi's waters churning backward against their natural flow. These earthquakes occurred in the middle of the continent, far from any plate boundary, making them geologically mysterious and impossible to predict. The sparsely populated region meant casualties were relatively low, but the psychological impact was enormous as newspapers across the young nation reported on nature's apparent assault on the American interior. The gentle return of disturbed river channels to their courses, the patient filling of new lakes created by shifting land, the sobering reminder that North America's stable appearance conceals geological forces that occasionally announce themselves with continental drama. What other surprises wait beneath the landscapes we consider most geologically peaceful and predictable? You're standing at the edge of what would become the Grand Canyon of the Mediterranean as ancient rivers carve spectacular gorges toward a completely evaporated sea basin 5.96 million years ago. When the Mediterranean dried up during the Messinian salinity crisis, rivers across southern Europe suddenly found themselves flowing toward a destination 1,500 meters lower than modern sea level. The Rhone, Nile, Po, and other major rivers responded by cutting canyons that rivaled the world's deepest gorges, carving through solid rock in just a few 100,000 years. You can imagine the thunderous cascade of the ancient Nile as it plunged into the Mediterranean basin through a canyon deeper than the modern Grand Canyon, the patient persistence of the Rhone cutting through French limestone toward a salt desert that stretched to the horizon. When the Atlantic Ocean refilled the Mediterranean during the Zanclean flood, these incredible river canyons were drowned beneath returning seawater, creating the submarine valleys that modern oceanographers map on the seafloor. The Nile's buried canyon extends 200 kilometers inland from its current delta, while the Rhone's drowned gorge can still be traced beneath the Gulf of Lion. The gentle lapping of waves above hidden landscapes, the patient preservation of river-carved beauty beneath Mediterranean waters, the remarkable reminder that some of Earth's most spectacular scenery lies forever hidden beneath familiar seas. What other magnificent landscapes sleep beneath the waters we sail across, holding stories of times when geography obeyed different rules? Dear listeners, drift back 56 million years to witness how massive releases of carbon from ancient wetlands and forests created both the most rapid global warming in Earth's history and the energy sources that would eventually power human civilization. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum saw global temperatures spike by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius as enormous amounts of methane and carbon dioxide escaped from thawing Arctic permafrost and destabilized ocean sediments. This ancient global warming event lasted about 200,000 years and transformed Earth into a greenhouse world where crocodiles basked in Arctic waters and tropical rainforests extended to both poles. You can imagine the gentle warmth of permanently ice-free polar regions, the patient adaptation of early mammals to tropical conditions at every latitude, the quiet accumulation of organic matter in vast swamps and shallow seas. Many of the world's major oil and gas deposits formed during this period, as abundant plant and marine life were buried in oxygen-poor sediments under the warm seas. The ironic twist is that the carbon that caused ancient global warming became the fossil fuels that powered the Industrial Revolution and contributed to modern climate change. The soft rustle of ancient ferns in polar forests, the slow transformation of life into energy buried beneath millions of years of rock, the profound connection between Earth's most ancient environmental crisis and humanity's current challenges. What other gifts from ancient catastrophes power our modern world, and what responsibilities do they carry? Hey friends, if you love this series, don't forget to subscribe and join us as we continue exploring nature's role in shaping human destiny. You're witnessing one of Europe's most powerful volcanic eruptions as Locher See in Germany explodes 12,900 years ago, blanketing vast areas of Central Europe in ash and fundamentally altering the landscape that would later become the heart of European civilization. This eruption occurred just as the last ice age was ending, creating a volcanic winter that may have contributed to the Younger Dryas cooling period that delayed Europe's transition to the modern interglacial climate. The explosion was so powerful that ash from Locher See can still be found in Greenland ice cores, while the eruption column reached heights of over 40 kilometers. You can almost hear the initial rumble echoing across Rhine valleys that had recently been freed from glacial ice. See the towering ash column that darkened skies from Britain to Poland. Feel the patient settling of volcanic dust over landscapes where reindeer herders were just beginning to transition to forest life. The eruption created the circular Locher See, a beautiful volcanic lake that became a peaceful reminder of the violence that shaped this region. Archaeological evidence suggests early human populations fled southward as volcanic ash made northern European hunting grounds uninhabitable for several years. The gentle lapping of lake waters in a volcano's sleeping throat, the quiet recovery of forests from ashfall, the reminder that Europe's most stable-seeming heartland was forged in geological fire that could awaken again. What other sleeping volcanoes rest beneath our most familiar landscapes, patiently dreaming of their next moment in geological history? You're floating in warm Devonian seas as the first forests on land begin their quiet revolution that will accidentally trigger one of Earth's greatest mass extinctions. Around 375 million years ago, primitive trees and plants spread across previously barren continents, their deep roots weathering rock and washing enormous amounts of nutrients into ancient oceans. These nutrients triggered massive algae blooms that consumed oxygen and created widespread dead zones, eliminating roughly 75% of marine species. The late Devonian extinction particularly devastated reef ecosystems and armored fish that had dominated ancient waters for millions of years. This crisis marked the end of the age of fishes and cleared ecological space for sharks, bony fish, and eventually tetrapods to colonize both water and land. The soft whisper of leaves that had never existed before, the slow poisoning of seas by terrestrial success, the profound reminder that evolution's greatest advances sometimes carry hidden costs for existing life. What other evolutionary victories of today might be quietly preparing tomorrow's unexpected consequences? Dear listeners, close your eyes and imagine tsunamis 100 times larger than any in human history racing across ancient oceans as the Chicxulub asteroid impact 66 million years ago creates waves that reshape every coastline on Earth. The asteroid's impact in the Yucatan Peninsula instantly vaporized the shallow sea and underlying bedrock, creating a cavity 30 kilometers deep that collapsed within minutes, generating tsunamis over 1,500 meters high in the Gulf of Mexico. These enormous waves radiated outward at jet aircraft speeds, carrying house-sized boulders hundreds of kilometers inland and depositing marine fossils on mountaintops. You can almost feel the ground shaking as the impact wave travels through solid rock faster than the tsunami travels through water. Hear the impossible roar of water moving at speeds that dwarf modern tidal waves. Witness the patient rearrangement of entire continental shelves in a matter of hours. The tsunamis circled the globe multiple times, with wave heights of 10 to 20 meters still devastating coastlines on the opposite side of the planet. These waves helped spread the environmental chaos that ended the age of dinosaurs, but they also created the geological signatures that modern scientists use to understand one of Earth's most dramatic moments. The gentle settling of tsunami deposits that would wait 66 million years for human discovery. The patient testimony of rocks that witnessed the day the world changed forever. What stories do the stones beneath our feet carry from days when the impossible became inevitable? Hey friends, imagine an entire continent the size of India, slowly sinking beneath Pacific waters over millions of years, creating the hidden landmass that scientists only recently recognized as Earth's 8th continent. Zealandia, which includes New Zealand and New Caledonia as its highest peaks, was once a thriving landmass connected to Australia and Antarctica during the Cretaceous period 100 million years ago. As tectonic forces stretched and thinned the continental crust, Zealandia gradually subsided until 94% of its surface area disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only scattered islands visible above sea level. You can almost hear the gentle lap of rising waters against mountain ranges that would become undersea ridges. Feel the patient persistence of geological forces pulling a continent toward the ocean floor. Witness the gradual isolation of plants and animals on shrinking island refugia. This slow-motion submergence lasted tens of millions of years and created unique evolutionary laboratories where species like the kiwi bird and tuatara evolved in isolation from the rest of the world. Modern scientific expeditions have discovered that the submerged portions of Zealandia contain fossil forests, coal seams, and freshwater sediments that tell the story of a lost world. The soft whisper of waves over drowned valleys, the quiet evolution happening on scattered peaks of a hidden continent, the reminder that even continents are temporary features on a planet that never stops changing. What other lost worlds sleep beneath familiar waters, holding evolutionary experiments we're only beginning to discover? You're walking through lush grasslands where the Sahara Desert now spreads endless sand, as North Africa experiences its most recent transformation from green paradise to the world's largest hot desert. Between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, the African humid period turned the Sahara into a landscape of lakes, rivers, and savannas that supported hippos, crocodiles, and thriving human communities. Changes in Earth's orbit brought monsoon rains deep into the continent, creating a green Sahara that was home to some of humanity's earliest pastoral societies. You can imagine the gentle patter of seasonal rains on grasslands that stretched from the Atlantic to the Nile. Hear the calls of waterbirds over lakes that dotted the landscape. Feel the contentment of communities that had no reason to expect their green world would ever end. Rock art from this period shows people herding cattle, fishing in now-vanished rivers, and living in harmony with abundant wildlife across what are now some of Earth's most arid regions. When orbital cycles shifted and the monsoons retreated southward, the Sahara's rapid return to desert conditions may have driven the first agricultural innovations along the Nile River, contributing to the rise of ancient Egyptian civilization. The patient accumulation of sand over abandoned settlements, the quiet testimony of cave paintings showing a world that seems impossible, the cyclical reminder that Earth's climate dances to rhythms longer than human memory. What other green worlds wait in the future of today's deserts, and what civilizations might they nurture? Dear listeners, drift into the story of how the largest flood in North American history carved the Snake River Plain and helped create the landscape that would become the Oregon Trail. Around 14,500 years ago, glacial ice dams containing ancient Lake Bonneville in Utah catastrophically failed, releasing 1,000 cubic kilometers of water that raced across Idaho at speeds up to 100 kilometers per hour. This flood was even larger than the famous Missoula floods and carved the Snake River Canyon system in a matter of days, moving boulders the size of buildings and stripping away hundreds of meters of sediment and rock. You can almost hear the thunderous roar of water volumes that dwarf all modern rivers combined. See house-sized rocks tumbling like pebbles in currents deeper than skyscrapers. Feel the patient carving of landscapes that would guide human migration for millennia. The Bonneville flood created the distinctive topography of southern Idaho, including the Snake River Canyon and the scablands that early pioneers would navigate on their way to Oregon. Geological evidence of this ancient catastrophe includes giant current ripples, erratics weighing thousands of tons, and sediment deposits that can be traced for hundreds of kilometers downstream. The gentle whisper of modern rivers following channels carved by impossible floods. The quiet testimony of landscapes shaped by forces beyond normal comprehension. The remarkable connection between Ice Age catastrophes and the roots that carried westward expansion. What other ancient floods carved the pathways that later civilizations would follow toward their destinies? You're watching hippopotamuses wade through the River Thames, and lions prowl through what would become downtown London during the last interglacial period when Earth was actually warmer than it is today. The Eemian Interglacial, from about 130,000 to 115,000 years ago, saw global temperatures rise 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above current levels, melting enough ice to raise sea levels 6 to 9 meters higher than today's coastlines. This warming phase transformed northern Europe into landscapes that seem almost tropical to our modern eyes, with elephants roaming through Germany and subtropical forests extending far into Scandinavia. Archaeological evidence suggests that early modern humans and Neanderthals coexisted during this warm period, sharing landscapes that supported much richer wildlife communities than exist today. The Eemian world had no permanent ice except on the highest mountains, and in the interior of Greenland, creating conditions that some scientists believe could return if current warming trends continue. The soft calls of exotic birds that once nested in Arctic latitudes, the quiet flow of rivers that ran where ice sheets now rest, the profound reminder that our normal climate is actually unusually cold compared to much of Earth's recent history. What forgotten warmth sleeps in our planet's memory, and what lessons does it offer about tomorrow's changing world? Hey friends, settle into the story of how a volcanic explosion in New Zealand around 232 CE created the most violent eruption in recorded human history and painted spectacular sunsets across the entire planet. The Taupo eruption ejected 120 cubic kilometers of material, equivalent to emptying Lake Tahoe and shooting its contents into the stratosphere, creating a volcanic winter that affected climate patterns globally. Chinese and Roman historical records describe unusually red sunsets and cold weather during this period, though they had no idea these phenomena originated from a volcanic blast on the opposite side of the world. You can almost hear the initial rumble echoing across North Island landscapes where Maori ancestors may have witnessed nature's most spectacular display. See the towering ash column that reached the edge of space. Feel the patient settling of volcanic dust that would circle the globe for years. The eruption created the modern Lake Taupo, New Zealand's largest lake, which now fills the collapsed volcanic caldera with peaceful waters that give no hint of the violence that shaped this landscape. Volcanic ash from Taupo has been found in Antarctic ice cores, while the eruption's impact on global climate may have contributed to crop failures and social upheaval as far away as Europe and China. The gentle lapping of lake waters in a sleeping supervolcano's throat, the quiet beauty born from incomprehensible destruction, the remarkable connections between isolated volcanic events and worldwide human experiences. What other sleeping giants rest beneath our most peaceful lakes, dreaming of their next moment to touch the sky? You're witnessing the moment when the continental shelf off Norway's coast suddenly decides to relocate itself to the deep ocean floor, creating the largest known submarine landslide in history and fundamentally altering the geography of northern Europe. Around 8,100 years ago, the Storegga slide moved approximately 5,500 cubic kilometers of sediment, equivalent to burying all of Iceland under 50 meters of mud in a matter of hours or days. This underwater avalanche generated tsunamis up to 20 meters high that swept across the North Sea, permanently flooding the land bridge between Britain and continental Europe known as Doggerland. You can imagine the deep rumble traveling through ocean sediments that had been stable for millennia, the patient acceleration of submarine mountains sliding toward abyssal depths, the thunderous displacement of water volumes that would reshape entire coastlines. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mesolithic hunter-gatherer communities living in Doggerland were caught completely unprepared by the resulting tsunamis, with their settlements and artifacts now resting beneath North Sea waters. The slide may have been triggered by earthquake activity or the rapid melting of gas hydrates as Ice Age conditions ended and ocean temperatures rose. The gentle settling of displaced sediments across hundreds of square kilometers of seafloor, the quiet submergence of landscapes where humans had lived for thousands of years, the sobering reminder that even ocean floors occasionally decide to rearrange themselves. What other unstable slopes rest beneath our familiar seas, patiently waiting for their moment to reshape the map? Dear listeners, drift back 232 million years to witness the Carnian pluvial episode, a mysterious period of intense tropical rainfall that lasted 2 million years and set the stage for dinosaurs to inherit the Earth. During the late Triassic period, massive volcanic eruptions in what is now western North America pumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, creating a superhumid climate that brought torrential monsoons to virtually every landmass on the planet. This global tropical deluge triggered one of the most significant evolutionary turnovers in Earth's history, as existing reptile communities collapsed and new groups, including the first dinosaurs, rapidly diversified to fill empty ecological niches. You can imagine the constant patter of warm rain on Triassic landscapes, the patient accumulation of organic-rich sediments in vast freshwater lakes, the quiet emergence of small dinosaurs taking advantage of environmental chaos that eliminated their competitors. Fossil evidence shows that this period of intense rainfall created enormous freshwater lake systems across the supercontinents, while marine ecosystems experienced major upheavals as terrestrial sediments poured into the oceans. Many of the reptile groups that had dominated earlier Triassic ecosystems went extinct during this wet period, but dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and early mammals all began their evolutionary radiations during or immediately after the Carnian rains, the soft splash of raindrops that would reshape evolutionary history, the gentle emergence of lineages that would dominate the planet for millions of years, the reminder that climate chaos often creates the conditions for life's greatest innovations. What other evolutionary opportunities are quietly taking root in today's environmental changes, waiting for their moment to inherit tomorrow? You're watching one of the most important ocean currents on Earth slowly shift and change as tectonic forces move Australia northward into the Indonesian archipelago, fundamentally altering global climate patterns over millions of years. The Indonesian throughflow, the passage of warm Pacific waters through Indonesian straits into the Indian Ocean, has been gradually constricted as Australia's collision with Southeast Asia creates increasingly narrow passages for ocean currents. This slow-motion tectonic dance has intensified over the past 15 million years, helping to establish the modern El Niño southern oscillation patterns that affect weather worldwide. You can imagine the patient collision of continents that happens too slowly for any individual to perceive, the gentle rearrangement of ocean passages that guide currents carrying the warmth of tropical seas, the quiet establishment of weather patterns that would eventually influence human civilizations across the Pacific. As the Indonesian passages narrow, more warm water is deflected westward into the Indian Ocean, affecting monsoon patterns that bring life-giving rains to billions of people across Asia and Africa. This ongoing geological process also helps drive the thermohaline circulation that regulates global ocean temperatures and weather systems, the soft whisper of currents finding new pathways through evolving geography, the patient establishment of climate patterns that seem permanent but continue to change, the profound reminder that the ocean currents we depend on are shaped by continents that never stop their slow dance across Earth's surface. What other invisible currents shape our daily weather from pathways carved by continents we think of as motionless? You're standing on what should be an ocean floor, as the greatest marine regression in Earth's history exposes vast continental shelves during the Permian-Triassic transition. As massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia altered global climate, sea levels dropped by over 100 meters, stranding marine ecosystems and eliminating the shallow epicontinental seas that had supported life for hundreds of millions of years. These vanishing seas left behind salt flats, exposed reefs, and stranded marine communities that had never experienced dry land. You can imagine the eerie silence of former seafloors stretching to horizons that had always been underwater, the gentle whisper of wind across exposed coral reefs, the patient desiccation of tide pools that would never know another tide. This dramatic sea level fall eliminated the nursery habitats where most marine life reproduced, contributing to the extinction of 96% of marine species during Earth's greatest mass extinction event. The regression also concentrated remaining marine life into smaller, more acidic ocean basins where volcanic gases had poisoned the water. When seas eventually returned, they found a world almost completely emptied of its former inhabitants. The soft crackle of salt crystals forming where waves once lapped, the quiet testimony of fossils exposed by retreating waters, the profound reminder that even the ocean's presence on our shores is temporary. What other familiar shores might one day become deserts, and what stories would their exposed floors tell? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift back 183 million years to witness one of the most severe disruptions of the global carbon cycle, when massive volcanic eruptions in what is now South Africa and Antarctica pumped so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that oceans lost their ability to circulate oxygen. The Torsian Oceanic, anoxic event, saw deep ocean waters become completely oxygen-free, creating conditions where only sulfur-eating bacteria could survive in vast purple and green mats that covered the sea surface. Marine ecosystems collapsed as normal photosynthesis was replaced by bacterial processes that produced hydrogen sulfide, a gas toxic to most life forms. You can almost smell the rotten egg scent of hydrogen sulfide drifting across ancient coastlines. See the eerie bacterial blooms painting oceans in otherworldly colors. Feel the patient adaptation of the few organisms that could survive in this poisoned world. This crisis lasted nearly 1 million years and eliminated many marine reptiles, ammonites, and early relatives of modern fish. However, it also created ideal conditions for preserving organic matter, forming many of the oil deposits that modern civilization depends on. The gentle lapping of toxic waves against Jurassic shores, the quiet accumulation of organic matter in airless depths, the remarkable transformation of environmental catastrophe into the energy resources that would power human advancement millions of years later. What other gifts from ancient environmental disasters quietly fuel our modern world? Hey friends! Imagine vast Permian coal swamps and methane deposits across northern Russia suddenly releasing their stored carbon into the atmosphere as the largest volcanic event in Earth's history literally cooked the landscape beneath Siberian Traps eruptions. Around 252 million years ago, these massive volcanic eruptions didn't just pour lava across millions of square kilometers. They also heated and released enormous methane and carbon dioxide deposits that had been locked in sediments for millions of years. This dual assault of volcanic gases and released organic carbon created the most severe greenhouse effect in Earth's history, raising global temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. You can imagine the gentle whisper of methane bubbling from warming sediments, the patient release of carbon that had been stored since Earth's early forests, the quiet transformation of buried swamps into atmospheric poison that would circle the globe for millennia. The methane releases may have been triggered by the volcanic heat, creating a positive feedback loop where warming led to more gas release, which led to more warming. This runaway greenhouse effect contributed to the Great Dying that eliminated 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial life. The soft hiss of ancient carbon finding its way back to the atmosphere. The slow recognition that even buried organic matter can return to haunt the climate. The sobering reminder that Earth's carbon cycle connects past, present, and future in ways we're still discovering. What other sleeping carbon deposits wait beneath our feet, dreaming of their eventual return to the sky? You're witnessing the birth pangs of the modern Atlantic Ocean as massive underwater volcanic eruptions create one of the most bizarre marine environments in Earth's history around 120 million years ago. The Aptian Oceanic Anoxic event saw the young Atlantic Ocean become so starved of oxygen that purple sulfur bacteria dominated its surface waters, creating an ocean that looked more like a giant bacterial mat than the blue waters we know today. Volcanic activity from the emerging mid-Atlantic ridge pumped enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and nutrients into seawater, triggering massive blooms of marine organisms that consumed all available oxygen as they decomposed. You can imagine the eerie purple and green sheen of bacterial communities covering vast ocean surfaces, the strange beauty of waters that glowed with microbial life, the patient adaptation of marine ecosystems to conditions unlike anything in modern seas. This event lasted over 1,000,000 years and coincided with some of the warmest global temperatures in Earth's history, when crocodiles lived in Arctic waters and no permanent ice existed anywhere on the planet. The oxygen-starved conditions were actually ideal for preserving organic matter, creating many of the oil deposits that ring the Atlantic basin today. The gentle swirl of bacterial mats in warm Cretaceous seas, the slow burial of organic-rich sediments in airless depths, the remarkable connection between ancient oceanic suffocation and modern energy abundance. What other oceanic cradles experienced such strange births, and what gifts did their struggles leave for future worlds? Dear listeners, settle into the story of how the completely evaporated Mediterranean basin, 5.96 million years ago, wasn't just a lifeless salt flat, but hosted a series of enormous freshwater lakes that became evolutionary laboratories for unique species found nowhere else on Earth. During the Messinian salinity crisis, while most of the Mediterranean had dried up, fresh water from African and European rivers collected in the deepest parts of the basin, creating isolated lake systems thousands of meters below the surrounding salt deserts. These lakes supported endemic fish, mollusks, and other aquatic life that evolved in complete isolation from the rest of the world's water bodies. You can imagine the gentle lapping of freshwater waves against salt-encrusted shores that had once known ocean tides, the calls of unique waterfowl that found refuge in these impossible oases, the patient evolution happening in waters surrounded by landscapes more alien than the moon. When the Atlantic Ocean catastrophically refilled the Mediterranean during the Zanclean flood, these freshwater lake ecosystems were completely destroyed, taking with them millions of years of unique evolutionary experiments. Some species may have survived by adapting to the returning salt water, while others left only fossils as evidence of their brief existence in Earth's strangest aquatic environments. The soft splash of endemic fish in lakes that defied geographical logic, the quiet extinction of entire evolutionary lineages as saltwater reclaimed its ancient domain, the poignant reminder that even the most improbable refuges can nurture life's endless creativity. What other impossible oases have sheltered evolution's most remarkable experiments, only to vanish when conditions changed? You're walking through the ruins of the Cretaceous world just after the Chicxulub impact, when small mammals that had lived in dinosaur shadows for 160 million years suddenly find themselves inheriting an empty planet ripe for evolutionary conquest. The extinction of non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago opened up ecological niches that mammals had never been able to access, triggering one of evolution's most rapid adaptive radiations. Within just 10 million years, a geological instant, mammals evolved from small, shrew-like creatures into forms as diverse as whales, bats, and early horses. You can imagine the gentle rustling of small mammals exploring abandoned dinosaur nesting sites, the patient discovery of new food sources in landscapes where giant reptiles no longer competed, the quiet emergence of evolutionary experiments that would eventually lead to intelligence, flight, and oceanic mastery. The early Paleocene world was warm and humid, with dense forests extending to both poles and creating ideal conditions for mammalian diversification. Some of the first large mammals, like the bear-sized Arctosian, appeared within the first few million years after the extinction, while the first primates, horses, and carnivores all trace their origins to this period of unprecedented opportunity. The soft patter of small feet on forest floors that had known the thunder of dinosaur footsteps, the quiet revolution of warm-blooded success, the remarkable reminder that evolution's greatest leaps often follow its most devastating setbacks. What other evolutionary explosions wait in the wings of today's environmental changes, ready to inherit tomorrow's empty niches? Hey friends, drift back 400 million years to witness the slow-motion collision that created the Appalachian Mountains as the ancient Iapetus Ocean gradually closed, bringing together continents that had been separated by thousands of kilometers of deep water for hundreds of millions of years. This ocean, sometimes called the Proto-Atlantic, existed long before the modern Atlantic formed and supported unique marine ecosystems that lived and died as tectonic forces slowly squeezed their world out of existence. As North America and Europe crept toward each other at rates of just centimeters per year, the Iapetus Ocean shrank, its seafloor was crushed and uplifted, and its marine life was either driven to extinction or forced to adapt to radically different conditions. You can imagine the patient grinding of continental edges that moved too slowly for any individual organism to perceive, the gradual shallowing of ancient deep-sea communities, the quiet elimination of ocean basins that had seemed as permanent as time itself. The collision created not just mountains, but also trapped ancient seawater in rock formations, preserved marine fossils on mountaintops, and established the geological foundation that would influence everything from coal formation to river patterns in eastern North America. When the supercontinent Pangaea eventually broke apart, the modern Atlantic Ocean opened roughly along the same zone where the ancient Iapetus had closed, creating an almost poetic cycle of oceanic death and rebirth, the gentle whisper of rock layers that remember ancient seafloors, the patient testimony of marine fossils now living in mountain air, the profound reminder that today's geography is just the latest chapter in an endless story of opening and closing seas. What other ocean graveyards sleep within our familiar mountain ranges, holding memories of seas we never knew existed? You're walking through lush tropical forests at the North Pole 50 million years ago, when Earth's greenhouse climate supported palm trees, crocodiles, and early primates in the Arctic Ocean region that today lies beneath permanent ice. During the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum and the following warm period, average Arctic temperatures were 23 degrees Celsius, warmer than modern-day Florida, and the entire Arctic Ocean was ice-free and surrounded by dense temperate to subtropical forests. Fossil evidence from Ellesmere Island and other Arctic locations reveals diverse ecosystems that included early horses, tapirs, flying lemurs, and even alligators living comfortably in polar regions that experience months of continuous darkness each winter. You can imagine the gentle rustle of palm fronds under the midnight sun, the calls of tropical birds nesting where polar bears now roam, the patient adaptation of warm climate organisms to the unique rhythm of polar seasons with their months of continuous light and darkness. These Arctic forests played a crucial role in regulating global climate by absorbing carbon dioxide, while their seasonal cycles of growth and dormancy created unique evolutionary pressures that may have contributed to the later success of deciduous trees in temperate regions. When global cooling began around 34 million years ago, these polar forests gradually retreated southward, leaving behind fossil forests preserved in permafrost and coal seams that provide windows into Earth's greenhouse past. The soft whisper of ancient leaves falling on Arctic soil, the quiet testimony of tropical fossils in polar ice, the remarkable reminder that our frozen polar regions once hosted some of Earth's most lush ecosystems. What other impossible gardens once bloomed in places we consider permanently frozen? And what lessons do they offer about our warming world? Dear listeners, close your eyes and journey back 2.4 billion years to witness life's first environmental crisis as tiny cyanobacteria begin producing a waste product so toxic it eliminates most existing life on Earth, and yet becomes the foundation for all complex organisms, including ourselves. The Great Oxidation Event was actually an environmental disaster for the anaerobic organisms that had dominated Earth for over 1 billion years, as oxygen was literally poisonous to the biochemistry that had evolved in Earth's oxygen-free early atmosphere. Free oxygen was so reactive it caused widespread rusting of iron-rich ocean waters and eliminated methane-based ecosystems that had thrived since life's earliest days. You can imagine the gentle bubbling of photosynthesis beginning to change everything, the patient accumulation of a gas that would transform the entire planet, the quiet revolution happening in microbial mats that had no idea they were rewriting the rules of chemistry itself. This oxygen holocaust eliminated perhaps 99% of all existing life forms, but it also enabled the evolution of aerobic respiration, a process so efficient that it made complex, energy-intensive organisms possible for the first time. The extinction crisis lasted hundreds of millions of years, but eventually led to the rise of eukaryotic cells, multicellular organisms, and ultimately the entire tree of complex life we see today. The soft whisper of chemical reactions that would make breathing possible, the patient transformation of planetary poison into biological treasure, the profound reminder that evolution's greatest advances often emerge from its most catastrophic failures. What other waste products of today might become tomorrow's most precious resources? And what life forms might thrive on what we consider pollution? You're standing with geologist Walter Alvarez in the 1970s as he discovers a thin clay layer in Italian rocks that contains concentrations of iridium 30 times higher than normal, a cosmic fingerprint that would revolutionize our understanding of mass extinctions and Earth's relationship with space. This iridium anomaly, found at the boundary between Cretaceous and Paleogene rock layers worldwide, provided the first concrete evidence that the extinction of dinosaurs was caused by an asteroid impact rather than gradual climate change or volcanic activity. Iridium is rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids, making this elevated concentration a smoking gun that pointed directly to space as the source of one of life's greatest catastrophes. You can almost feel the excitement of scientific discovery as researchers realized they were looking at evidence of the day the world changed 66 million years ago. The patient accumulation of cosmic dust in a thin layer that recorded moments of unprecedented violence, the quiet testimony of rocks that had witnessed the collision between Earth and space. The discovery of the iridium anomaly led to the identification of the Chicxulub crater in Mexico and transformed our understanding of how cosmic events shape biological history. This thin layer of clay, just centimeters thick, represents one of the most dramatic days in Earth's 4.6 billion year story and reminds us that our planet travels through a cosmic shooting gallery where chance encounters with space rocks can reshape the entire course of evolution. What other cosmic fingerprints wait in Earth's rock layers, holding secrets about encounters between our world and the vast universe beyond? You're witnessing one of paleontology's greatest gifts as underwater mudslides in the Middle Cambrian period, 508 million years ago, instantly bury thriving marine communities in what is now the Canadian Rockies, creating the most detailed snapshot of early complex life ever discovered. The Burgess Shale formed when periodic sediment flows swept down underwater cliffs, suffocating entire ecosystems, but preserving them in extraordinary detail, including soft tissues that normally decay within days of death. This exceptional preservation captured bizarre creatures like Opabenia with its vacuum cleaner proboscis, Wiwaxia with its defensive spines, and Hallucigenia walking on stilts, revealing the wild experimental phase of animal evolution when nature was still figuring out basic body plans. You can imagine the gentle rain of fine sediment settling over Cambrian seafloors, the patient entombment of creatures in their moment of daily life, the quiet preservation of evolutionary experiments that would wait 500 million years for human eyes to discover them. The Burgess Shale fossils revolutionized our understanding of evolution by showing that early animal diversity was far greater than previously imagined, with many body plans that have no modern equivalents. the soft whisper of ancient mudslides that became time capsules, the remarkable clarity of fossils that preserve even the finest details of prehistoric life, the humbling reminder that we owe much of our knowledge about evolution's early experiments to catastrophic burial events. What other evolutionary treasures wait in mudslides and avalanches, holding secrets about life's forgotten experiments? Dear listeners, settle into the story of how the completely evaporated Mediterranean basin, 5.96 million years ago, created salt deposits over a kilometer thick that would later become some of Europe's most valuable mineral resources and shape the location of major cities. As Mediterranean waters slowly evaporated during the Messinian salinity crisis, dissolved minerals precipitated in layers that recorded the changing chemistry of a dying sea, first gypsum, then halite, then exotic salts that form only under the most extreme conditions. These massive salt deposits, buried when the Mediterranean refilled, became the foundation for salt mines that have operated for millennia across southern Europe and North Africa. You can imagine the patient crystallization of ancient seawater under Mediterranean sunshine, the gentle accumulation of mineral layers that would outlast mountains, the quiet formation of underground treasure vaults that civilizations would discover and exploit for thousands of years. Roman roads often followed salt routes. Medieval cities grew around salt mines, and even modern industrial chemistry depends on these Messinian deposits. The famous salt mines of Sicily, the Camargue salt pans of France, and countless other salt sources trace their origins to this ancient drying of the Mediterranean Sea. The soft crackle of crystallizing brines under an ancient sun, the patient building of mineral wealth beneath vanished waters, the remarkable connection between geological catastrophe and the seasoning on tonight's dinner table. What other buried treasures from ancient catastrophes quietly support our daily lives without us ever knowing their dramatic origins? Hey friends, drift back 260 million years to witness a dress rehearsal for the Great Dying as the Middle Permian-Capetanian extinction eliminated the largest reef systems in Earth's history, clearing ecological space that would never be refilled before the even greater catastrophe that ended the Permian period. This earlier extinction event eliminated the spectacular Permian reef ecosystems built by giant glass sponges, rugose corals, and bryozoans that created underwater landscapes more diverse and extensive than modern coral reefs. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now China released greenhouse gases and toxic compounds that acidified oceans and disrupted marine food webs, causing the collapse of reef systems that had dominated shallow seas for millions of years. You can imagine the gentle filtering of ancient reef organisms suddenly stopping as ocean chemistry turned hostile, the patient bleaching of reef structures that had taken millennia to build, the quiet emptying of ecosystems that had been among Earth's most biodiverse environments. The Capetanian extinction was overshadowed by the later Great Dying, but it represents a crucial turning point when Earth's marine ecosystems shifted from the complex reef-dominated communities of the Paleozoic to the simpler ecosystems that characterized the early Mesozoic. The soft whisper of currents through abandoned reef frameworks, the gradual burial of once thriving ecosystems under layers of sediment, the sobering preview of how quickly diverse communities can collapse when environmental conditions change too rapidly for adaptation. What other dress rehearsals for major catastrophes are quietly unfolding in today's ecosystems, preparing stages for changes we haven't yet recognized? You're standing at ground zero of one of the largest asteroid impacts in Earth's history, as a 10 to 15 kilometer wide space rock slams into what is now Ontario, Canada, 1.85 billion years ago, creating geological conditions that would eventually supply much of the world's nickel and other precious metals. The Sudbury impact was so powerful it melted the Earth's crust to depths of several kilometers, creating a unique type of molten rock that concentrated heavy metals like nickel, copper, platinum, and gold, as it slowly cooled over thousands of years. This cosmic catastrophe essentially created a gigantic natural smelter that separated and concentrated metals in ways that normal geological processes could never achieve. You can imagine the initial flash brighter than 1,000 suns, the patient cooling of impact melt that would become one of Earth's richest ore deposits, the quiet concentration of cosmic and terrestrial metals in underground chambers that would wait nearly 2 billion years for human discovery. The Sudbury Basin produces about 10% of the world's nickel and has been mined continuously since the 1880s, making it one of the longest operating mining districts on the planet. Indigenous peoples had known about unusual rocks in the area for centuries before European settlers realized they were sitting on top of one of Earth's greatest mineral treasures. The gentle whisper of cosmic debris settling into molten rock, the slow crystallization of space-borne wealth, the remarkable reminder that some of our most valuable resources literally fell from the sky. What other cosmic gifts lie buried beneath our feet, waiting to be discovered as testimony to Earth's violent encounters with space? Dear listeners, close your eyes and imagine European rivers transforming into waterfalls more spectacular than Niagara as they plunge toward a Mediterranean basin that has dropped 1,500 meters below sea level during the Messinian salinity crisis 5.96 million years ago. When the Mediterranean evaporated, rivers like the Rhone, Po, and dozens of smaller waterways suddenly found themselves flowing toward a destination far below their normal base level, creating some of the most dramatic river profiles in Earth's history. The Rhone carved a canyon through solid limestone that was deeper than the Grand Canyon, while alpine streams became thunderous cataracts cascading toward salt flats that stretched to every horizon. You can almost hear the roar of impossible waterfalls echoing through limestone gorges. Feel the mist rising from cascades that had no equivalent in the modern world. Witness the patient carving of canyons by waters racing toward an impossible destination. These ancient river canyons were completely drowned when the Atlantic Ocean catastrophically refilled the Mediterranean during the Zanclean flood, but their buried courses still influence modern river patterns and create the submarine valleys that oceanographers map on the Mediterranean seafloor today. The gentle persistence of water following gravity's call toward an ever-deepening basin, the spectacular landscapes that existed for just a geological instant, the hidden geography that sleeps beneath familiar Mediterranean waters. What other impossible waterfalls once thundered through landscapes we think we know, leaving only hidden traces of their brief magnificence? You're witnessing the final chapter of the solar system's violent youth as a storm of asteroids and comets pounds both Earth and Moon between 4.1 and 3.8 billion years ago, creating the cratered lunar surface we see today while potentially delivering the water that would make life possible on our planet. The late heavy bombardment saw impact rates hundreds of times higher than anything in recorded geological history, with objects large enough to vaporize entire oceans striking Earth every few million years. While Earth's active geology has erased most evidence of this cosmic assault, the Moon preserves a scarred record of the battering both worlds endured during this period. You can imagine the gentle rain of cosmic debris that was actually a hurricane of destruction, the patient accumulation of impact scars on landscapes that had no atmosphere to burn up incoming objects, the quiet delivery of water and organic compounds that would later enable the emergence of life. Many scientists believe this bombardment actually helped jumpstart life on Earth by delivering essential volatiles and creating the chemical disequilibrium that living organisms could exploit for energy. The largest impacts during this period created temporary magma oceans and may have repeatedly sterilized Earth's surface, but they also brought the raw materials for oceans, atmospheres, and ultimately biology. The soft whisper of cosmic snowballs and rocky mountains falling from space, the patient building of worlds through destruction, the remarkable possibility that life itself owes its existence to a period of unprecedented cosmic violence. What other cosmic storms shaped our world's hidden history, and what gifts did they bring disguised as catastrophes? Hey friends, settle back as we journey to 34 million years ago when Antarctica's first major ice sheets began forming, triggering a global cooling event that ended Earth's last prolonged greenhouse period and established the climate patterns that would eventually lead to our modern ice ages. The transition from the warm Eocene to the cooler Oligocene epoch saw atmospheric carbon dioxide levels drop below a critical threshold that allowed permanent ice to accumulate on Antarctica for the first time in over 100 million years. This Antarctic glaciation caused sea levels to drop by over 100 meters as water became locked in ice, while the new white ice sheets reflected so much sunlight back to space that global temperatures dropped by several degrees Celsius. You can imagine the gentle accumulation of snow that never melted on Antarctic highlands, the patient building of ice sheets that would reshape global weather patterns, the quiet transition from a greenhouse world where palm trees grew at the poles to an icehouse world that would eventually spawn human evolution. The formation of Antarctic ice also strengthened ocean currents and changed precipitation patterns worldwide, causing the expansion of grasslands and the evolution of grazing animals that would become the ancestors of modern horses, rhinos, and other large mammals. The soft crunch of perpetual snow becoming permanent ice, the gradual whitening of a continent that would regulate Earth's thermostat for millions of years, the remarkable reminder that even our most stable-seeming ice sheets had a beginning and will eventually have an end. What other climate tipping points await in our future, ready to reshape the world as dramatically as Antarctica's first freeze? You're witnessing one of evolution's greatest ironies as the first large trees and deep-rooted plants colonize late Devonian continents 375 million years ago, inadvertently triggering a mass extinction that eliminated most marine life through their innocent success on land. As primitive forests spread across previously barren continents, their roots began the first large-scale weathering of rock, releasing enormous amounts of nutrients into rivers and ultimately into ancient oceans. These nutrients triggered massive algal blooms that consumed oxygen and created widespread marine dead zones, eliminating roughly 75% of marine species in what became known as the Late Devonian extinction. You can imagine the gentle rustling of Earth's first true forests, the patient chemical weathering of granite and limestone by root systems that had never existed before, the paradoxical tragedy of terrestrial success causing oceanic collapse. The extinction particularly devastated the diverse reef ecosystems built by stromatoporoids and tabulate corals, while armored fish that had dominated Devonian seas largely disappeared. However, this crisis also cleared ecological space for sharks, bony fish, and the first tetrapods to diversify and colonize both aquatic and terrestrial environments. The soft whisper of leaves on trees that were reshaping the world simply by growing, the slow poisoning of ancient seas by terrestrial prosperity, the profound reminder that evolution's greatest advances often carry unintended consequences for existing ecosystems. What other evolutionary success stories of today might be quietly preparing tomorrow's unexpected environmental challenges? Dear listeners, drift into the story of how massive volcanic eruptions gradually melted Earth's most extreme ice ages between 750 and 635 million years ago, when our entire planet had become a giant snowball with glaciers extending from the poles to the equator and ice covering even tropical oceans. During these snowball Earth episodes, global average temperatures dropped to -50 degrees Celsius, creating conditions where virtually no liquid water existed anywhere on Earth's surface. However, volcanic activity continued beneath the ice, slowly pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over millions of years, until greenhouse gas concentrations reached levels high enough to overcome the planet's frozen state. You can imagine the patient accumulation of volcanic gases beneath a world locked in ice, the gentle warming that began in volcanic hotspots and gradually spread across continents, the spectacular moment when global ice sheets finally began their retreat after millions of years of frozen dominance. The end of each Snowball Earth episode was followed by rapid warming and a return to greenhouse conditions, creating dramatic climate swings that may have driven the evolution of complex cells and multicellular life. These extreme glaciations were likely triggered by continental configurations that enhanced rock weathering and removed too much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, while their ending required volcanic emissions to rebuild greenhouse conditions from scratch. The soft hiss of carbon dioxide bubbling through ice that had seemed eternal, the patient persistence of geological processes that operated even in Earth's most frozen state, the remarkable reminder that even impossible ice ages eventually yield to the planet's internal fire. What other extreme states might Earth experience in the future, and what forces would eventually restore more familiar conditions? You're floating on the surface of the final Mediterranean Sea 5.33 million years ago, as the last connection to the Atlantic Ocean closes, transforming this ancient basin into an enormous brackish lake called Lago Mare that supported unique ecosystems found nowhere else in Earth's history. As the Gibraltar Gateway gradually sealed shut during the Messinian salinity crisis, the Mediterranean didn't immediately become a salt desert. Instead, it became a giant inland sea fed by rivers, but with no outlet to the ocean, creating water chemistry and environmental conditions that had never existed before on such a scale. This brackish lake supported endemic species of mollusks, fish, and other aquatic life that evolved specifically for these intermediate salinity conditions, while its shores became refugia for terrestrial animals during a period of global cooling. You can imagine the gentle lapping of slightly salty waters that were neither sea nor freshwater lake, the calls of unique water birds that found perfect conditions in this impossible ecosystem, the patient evolution of life forms adapted to a world that was destined to be temporary. The Lago Mare phase lasted only about 160,000 years before the catastrophic Zanclean flood refilled the Mediterranean with Atlantic water, completely destroying these unique brackish ecosystems and replacing them with normal marine environments. Fossil evidence of Lago Mare species can still be found in sediments around the Mediterranean basin, providing glimpses of evolutionary experiments that were terminated by the return of oceanic conditions. The soft splash of brackish waves on shores that would soon know Atlantic tides, the quiet adaptation of life to conditions that couldn't last, the poignant reminder that some evolutionary experiments are doomed by the very geological forces that create them. What other temporary worlds have hosted brief evolutionary experiments that ended when their unique conditions vanished? You're settling into a world where the sun barely shines as the year 536 CE brings what historians call the worst year to be alive, when massive volcanic eruptions create a nuclear winter effect that plunges the northern hemisphere into 18 months of darkness and cold. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave no more light than the moon, while temperatures dropped so severely that crops failed across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The volcanic winter triggered famines that weakened populations just as the Justinian plague began spreading, creating a perfect storm of environmental and biological catastrophe. You can imagine the eerie twilight that lasted for seasons, the desperate attempts to grow food in perpetual gloom, the quiet desperation of communities watching their world grow cold and dark. This climatic disaster contributed to the fall of several civilizations, including the collapse of the Teotihuacan culture in Mexico and major political upheavals across Eurasia. The crisis also may have contributed to the decline of the Western Roman Empire's final remnants, and enabled the rise of new powers in the changed world. What other forgotten years of darkness shaped civilizations in ways that echo through history books without explanation? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift to 1783 as the Laki volcanic eruption in Iceland releases poisonous gases and ash that create crop failures across Europe, contributing to the social unrest that would explode into the French Revolution just 6 years later. The 8-month eruption created a toxic fog that drifted across Europe, causing respiratory problems and killing livestock, while ash and sulfur compounds altered weather patterns and shortened growing seasons. In France, the volcanic winter destroyed harvests and caused bread prices to soar, hitting the poor hardest and creating the economic desperation that revolutionary leaders would later exploit. You can almost taste the acrid air that burned throats across the continent, feel the growing desperation as food became scarce, hear the angry voices that would soon demand political change. The eruption killed about 25% of Iceland's population and created global climate anomalies that affected harvests from Japan to North America. This environmental crisis demonstrated how distant volcanic events could destabilize entire societies by disrupting the delicate balance between population and food supply that characterized pre-industrial Europe. How many other political revolutions were secretly triggered by environmental crises that made existing inequalities unbearable? Hey friends, journey to November 18, 1755, when a powerful earthquake centered off Cape Ann, Massachusetts, shakes buildings from Nova Scotia to South Carolina and forces Puritan New England to confront the reality that even their promised land was built on unstable ground. The magnitude 6.0-6.3 earthquake was felt over 300,000 square miles and damaged hundreds of buildings, including cracking the walls of Harvard College and toppling chimneys throughout Boston. The quake struck at 4:15 a.m., throwing people from their beds and creating panic in communities that had never experienced significant seismic activity. You can imagine the terror of colonists who believed earthquakes were divine punishment, the sound of church bells ringing spontaneously as buildings swayed, the theological debates that followed about God's intentions for the new world. The earthquake prompted the first serious geological studies in North America and challenged religious explanations of natural disasters. It also influenced building practices in New England and led to some of the earliest scientific earthquake observations in the Americas. The gentle reminder that even the most stable-seeming ground can move, the patient beginning of American earthquake science, the profound impact on colonial worldview. What other natural disasters forced religious communities to reconsider their understanding of divine favor and earthly stability? You're witnessing the legendary Year of the Elephant, as an Aksumite army led by Abraha advances on Mecca with war elephants, only to be stopped by what Islamic tradition describes as divine intervention, but may have been a devastating epidemic that medieval sources attribute to birds carrying smallpox or plague. This failed invasion occurred in the same year as the Prophet Muhammad's birth and became a foundational story in Islamic history, demonstrating divine protection of the holy city. The army's retreat after disease struck their forces left a lasting impression on Arabian society, and may have contributed to the political conditions that enabled Islam's later rapid expansion. You can imagine the awe and terror of Meccan tribes seeing war elephants for the first time, the sudden devastation as disease swept through the invading army, the quiet recognition that nature's invisible forces could determine the fate of empires. The epidemic's timing seemed miraculous to contemporary observers and became embedded in religious tradition as evidence of divine intervention in human affairs. Archaeological evidence suggests that epidemic diseases were common along trade routes connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Byzantine Empire during this period. How often have sudden epidemics changed the course of military campaigns in ways that seemed miraculous to those who witnessed them? Dear listeners, settle into the tragic story of May 8, 1902, when Mount Pelée on the Caribbean island of Martinique erupts with a pyroclastic flow that destroys the city of Saint-Pierre in less than 3 minutes, killing nearly 30,000 people and demonstrating the deadly power of volcanic nuées ardentes. The eruption occurred during a tense period when residents were being encouraged to stay in the city despite weeks of warning signs, partly due to an upcoming election that local officials didn't want disrupted. The superheated gas and ash flow raced down the mountain at over 100 miles per hour, instantly incinerating everything in its path and leaving only 2 survivors in the entire city. You can almost feel the morning heat that suddenly became lethal, hear the brief roar that preceded total silence, witness the transformation of a thriving colonial port into a landscape of ash and twisted metal. The disaster shocked the world and led to major advances in volcanology, while the famous survivor Ludger Silberus became a celebrity after being rescued from his underground jail cell. The eruption also influenced French colonial policy and contributed to changes in how volcanic hazards were understood and communicated to vulnerable populations. What other natural disasters were made worse by political considerations that prevented proper evacuation and preparation? You're attending a volcanology conference on January 14, 1993, when Galeras volcano in Colombia suddenly erupts during a scientific field trip to its crater, killing 6 volcanologists and 3 tourists in a tragedy that changed how scientists study active volcanoes. The eruption occurred without the usual warning signs that scientists had been monitoring, creating a small but deadly explosion that caught the research team completely off guard. Among the victims were some of the world's leading experts on volcanic hazards, including researchers who had dedicated their careers to making volcanic areas safer for human habitation. You can imagine the excitement of scientists examining an active crater, the sudden terror as rocks and gases exploded around them, the tragic irony of volcano experts being killed by the very forces they had devoted their lives to understanding. The disaster led to major changes in volcanic monitoring protocols and influenced how scientists balanced the need for close observation with personal safety. It also highlighted the unpredictable nature of volcanic activity and the risks faced by researchers working to protect vulnerable populations. The quiet dedication of scientists who risk their lives to understand dangerous natural forces. The sudden reminder that nature doesn't respect expertise or good intentions. How many other scientific advances have come at the cost of researchers who died trying to understand the forces that threaten human communities? Hey friends, journey to December 26, 2004, when a magnitude 9.1, 9.3 earthquake beneath the Indian Ocean generates tsunamis that reach heights of 100 feet and travel across entire ocean basins, killing over 230,000 people in 14 countries and forever changing how the world understands seismic hazards. The Sumatra Andaman earthquake was caused by the sudden rupture of a 1,600-kilometer section of the Indo-Australian and Burma tectonic plates, creating the longest fault rupture ever documented. The resulting tsunamis reached coastlines hours later, with waves that penetrated up to 2 kilometers inland, destroying entire coastal communities from Thailand to Somalia. You can almost hear the ocean retreating with an ominous hiss before the first wave arrived. Feel the growing realization that the receding water meant danger rather than curiosity. Witness the heartbreaking moments when paradise became catastrophe. The disaster led to the establishment of tsunami warning systems across the Indian Ocean and fundamentally changed coastal development policies worldwide. It also demonstrated how modern communication technology could both help and hinder disaster response, as cell phone videos and internet reports brought unprecedented real-time awareness of a natural disaster's global impact. What other modern disasters have been shaped by our interconnected world's ability to witness catastrophe as it unfolds across continents? You're experiencing one of the 20th century's most preventable volcanic disasters, as Nevado del Ruiz in Colombia erupts on November 13, 1985, melting glacial ice that creates devastating lahars, volcanic mud flows that bury the town of Armero and kill over 23,000 people despite clear warnings from volcanologists. The eruption was relatively small, but it melted part of the volcano's ice cap, creating massive flows of volcanic debris, ice, and water that raced down river valleys at speeds up to 40 miles per hour. Scientists had identified the threat and issued warnings, but poor communication and political indecision prevented effective evacuation of threatened areas. You can imagine the growing concern of volcanologists watching dangerous signs, the frustrating attempts to communicate urgent warnings through bureaucratic channels, the tragic preventability of a disaster that unfolded exactly as scientists had predicted. The Armero tragedy became a classic case study in volcanic risk communication and highlighted the deadly consequences when scientific warnings aren't translated into effective emergency response. The disaster also influenced how volcanic hazards are communicated to government officials and the public worldwide. How many other preventable disasters remind us that having knowledge and acting on knowledge are two completely different challenges? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift to 1815 as Mount Tambora in Indonesia produces the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history, ejecting so much material into the atmosphere that it creates global climate anomalies lasting several years and demonstrates how a single geological event can affect the entire planet. The eruption killed over 10,000 people directly, and at least 80,000 more from the famine and disease that followed, while volcanic ash and sulfur compounds circled the globe and caused spectacular sunsets worldwide. The climatic effects included the famous Year Without a Summer in 1816, when snow fell in June across New England, and crop failures in Europe created widespread famine. You can almost see the blood-red sunsets that painters tried to capture. Feel the unseasonable cold that confused farmers worldwide, hear the desperate prayers for normal weather as growing seasons failed year after year. The eruption's effects influenced literature, with the gloomy summer of 1816 inspiring Mary Shelley to write Frankenstein during her famous ghost story contest in Switzerland. The climate crisis also triggered massive migration within the United States, as New England farmers abandoned their frozen fields for warmer western territories. What other single events in Earth's history have had such far-reaching consequences that they changed weather patterns in human societies across multiple continents? You're witnessing the largest underwater landslide in recorded geological history as the Storegga Slide off Norway's coast 8,000 years ago displaces thousands of cubic kilometers of sediment and generates tsunamis up to 20 meters high that sweep across the North Sea, fundamentally changing the geography of northern Europe. The massive submarine landslide was triggered by the rapid melting of ice sheets that destabilized sediments accumulated during previous ice ages, creating conditions for catastrophic failure of the continental shelf. The resulting tsunamis traveled at jet aircraft speeds across the North Sea, reaching heights of 6 meters when they struck Scotland's coast, and permanently flooding vast areas of low-lying land called Doggerland that had connected Britain to continental Europe. You can imagine the deep rumble traveling through ocean sediments before the massive displacement, the thunderous arrival of impossible waves on Stone Age coastlines, the permanent drowning of landscapes where Mesolithic peoples had lived for thousands of years. The disaster completed Britain's transformation from peninsula to island and may have influenced the development of maritime cultures in northern Europe. Archaeological evidence of drowned forests and human settlements continues to be discovered on the North Sea floor. What other catastrophic geological events quietly shaped the geography we take for granted, creating the islands and coastlines we consider permanent features? You're floating in the iron-rich seas of the Archean Earth 2.5 billion years ago, witnessing one of the most dramatic chemical transformations in our planet's history, as the first oxygen-producing bacteria begin poisoning ancient oceans with their toxic waste product. The Great Oxidation Event created the spectacular banded iron formations, alternating layers of red iron oxide and black chert that stretch across continents and represent the moment when life's waste product literally rusted the oceans. For over 1 billion years, dissolved iron had colored Earth's seas a deep green, but as cyanobacteria pumped oxygen into the water, this iron precipitated out in vast red layers that accumulated on seafloors across the globe. You can imagine the gentle chemical precipitation occurring as oxygen met iron for the first time, the patient layering of minerals that would create some of Earth's most beautiful rock formations, the quiet revolution that was making aerobic life possible while eliminating most existing organisms. These banded iron formations became the foundation for much of modern industry, as the Mesabi Range, Pilbara region, and other iron-rich deposits formed during this period still supply most of the world's steel production. The soft whisper of chemical reactions that changed everything. The gradual transformation of toxic waste into the foundation for breathing. The remarkable connection between ancient bacterial metabolism and modern skyscrapers. What other waste products from today's life forms might become tomorrow's most valuable resources? Dear listeners, close your eyes and journey back 2.02 billion years to witness the largest confirmed asteroid impact in Earth's history as a space rock possibly 15 kilometers wide slams into what is now South Africa, creating a crater over 300 kilometers in diameter and fundamentally altering the geology of an entire region. The Vredefort impact was so powerful, it created pressures and temperatures that transformed ordinary rocks into exotic minerals that can only form under extreme shock conditions, while the impact crater's concentric rings are still visible today as curved ridges in the South African landscape. This cosmic collision occurred during the early Proterozoic era, when Earth's first supercontinent was forming, and life consisted mainly of simple bacterial communities. You can imagine the initial flash that briefly created conditions hotter than the sun's surface, the patient cooling of impact melt that crystallized into unique rock formations, the quiet rearrangement of geology across hundreds of kilometers as shock waves rippled through ancient bedrock. The impact may have influenced early atmospheric evolution by vaporizing enormous amounts of rock and temporarily altering global climate patterns. Modern gold mining in the Witwatersrand Basin has revealed how the impact fractured and rearranged rock layers, creating the geological structures that would later concentrate precious metals. The gentle whisper of cosmic debris settling across an ancient continent, the slow erosion that revealed Earth's largest impact scar, the remarkable preservation of evidence from our planet's most violent cosmic encounter. What other cosmic scars hide beneath familiar landscapes, waiting to tell stories of days when mountains fell from space? Hey friends, settle back as we journey to 717 million years ago, when the most severe ice age in Earth's history locked our entire planet in a frozen state more extreme than anything we can imagine today. The Sturtian glaciation was the first of the great snowball Earth events, when ice sheets extended from the poles to the equator and sea ice covered even tropical oceans, creating global average temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius. This planetary deep freeze may have been triggered by the breakup of the supercontinent Rodinia, which increased rock weathering and removed so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that runaway cooling began. You can imagine the patient advance of ice sheets across landscapes that had never known winter, the gentle freezing of tropical seas that had warmed under equatorial sun for millions of years, the profound silence of a world where virtually no liquid water existed anywhere on the surface. Life survived this frozen catastrophe in a few ice-free refugia around volcanic hotspots, and possibly beneath the ice itself, but the stress of global freezing may have triggered the evolution of more complex cells with nuclei. The Sturtian glaciation lasted for approximately 60 million years before volcanic carbon dioxide buildup finally overcame Earth's frozen state. The soft crackle of expanding ice that covered everything, the patient persistence of life in impossible conditions, the remarkable resilience that carried early organisms through Earth's most frozen epoch. What evolutionary innovations were forged in the crucible of that impossible ice, and how do they live on in today's life? You're walking across Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean 4,000 years ago, when the last woolly mammoths on Earth browse through dwarf willows and Arctic grasses, unaware they represent the final chapter of an evolutionary story that began millions of years earlier. While mammoths disappeared from mainland continents around 10,000 years ago, as ice sheets retreated and human populations expanded, a small population of these Ice Age giants survived on this isolated Arctic island, evolving into a dwarf species adapted to island life. These island mammoths stood only about 6 feet tall, roughly half the size of their mainland relatives, and developed unique adaptations for life on a resource-limited island surrounded by sea ice. You can imagine the gentle rumble of small mammoth herds moving across treeless landscapes, the soft crunch of permafrost under feet that had walked these same paths for thousands of years, the patient adaptation to isolation that allowed Ice Age megafauna to persist into the age of pyramids and Bronze Age civilizations. The Wrangel Island mammoths finally went extinct around 2000 BCE, possibly due to climate change that reduced their island habitat, genetic bottlenecks from their small population, or the eventual arrival of human hunters. Their disappearance marked the end of the Pleistocene epoch's megafauna and closed a chapter of Earth's history that had lasted for millions of years. The quiet browsing of the last giants in a changing world, the patient adaptation that bought a few extra millennia for an ancient lineage, the poignant reminder that even the most successful survival strategies eventually encounter limits. What other evolutionary refugia exist today, sheltering the last representatives of ancient worlds we're only beginning to understand? Dear listeners, drift back 540 million years to witness one of ecology's most important innovations as marine organisms during the Cambrian period begin burrowing into seafloor sediments, fundamentally changing ocean ecosystems from two-dimensional surfaces to three-dimensional communities. Before this substrate revolution, life existed mainly on top of seafloor mats of bacteria and algae, but the evolution of burrowing organisms created entirely new ecological niches and changed the chemistry of marine sediments forever. Early arthropods, worms, and mollusks began digging feeding tunnels, defensive burrows, and permanent homes in the seafloor, mixing sediments and introducing oxygen to depths that had been anaerobic for billions of years. You can imagine the gentle scraping of the first claws and appendages learning to excavate seafloor muds, the patient boring of tubes and tunnels that created underwater apartment complexes, the quiet revolution that transformed flat bacterial mats into complex three-dimensional ecosystems. This burrowing activity, called bioturbation, changed ocean chemistry by bringing oxygenated water deeper into sediments and cycling nutrients in ways that had never existed before. The substrate revolution also destroyed the microbial mats that had dominated seafloors since life began, replacing them with the mixed sediments and diverse communities that characterize modern ocean floors. The soft whisper of ancient organisms learning to dig, the gradual transformation of seafloors from simple surfaces to complex habitats, the remarkable expansion of life's possibilities when organisms learn to live in 3 dimensions instead of 2. What other dimensional expansions await in evolution's future, and how might life discover new ways to occupy space? You're standing in the world's first forests, 400 million years ago, as primitive plants like Archaeopteris develop wood, root systems, and the ability to grow over 20 meters tall, fundamentally changing terrestrial ecosystems and beginning the transformation that would make land habitable for complex animal life. The late Silurian and early Devonian periods saw plants evolve from simple moss-like organisms hugging the ground to complex trees with deep root systems that could weather rock, create soil, and support elaborate forest canopies. This terrestrial revolution created the first woodland ecosystems, provided shelter and food sources for early land arthropods, and began the massive carbon sequestration that would eventually lead to coal formation. You can imagine the gentle rustle of the world's first tree leaves in primordial breezes, the patient deepening of root systems that were learning to anchor tall structures, the quiet establishment of forest ecosystems that would become the foundation for all terrestrial life. The evolution of wood allowed plants to compete for sunlight by growing taller than their neighbors, while deep root systems enabled them to access water and nutrients from soil layers that surface plants couldn't reach. These early forests also began the chemical weathering of rock on an unprecedented scale, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and potentially contributing to the ice ages that would follow. The soft creaking of ancient wood, learning to support impossible heights, the gradual transformation of barren landscapes into green worlds, the remarkable innovation that made terrestrial ecosystems as complex as marine ones. What other fundamental innovations are quietly taking root in today's ecosystems, preparing to reshape tomorrow's world? Hey friends, journey into the toxic oceans of 252 million years ago, as the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history transforms normal blue seas into purple bacterial mats that produce hydrogen sulfide, a gas so poisonous it may have contributed to the elimination of 96% of marine species during the end Permian extinction. The Great Dying wasn't just caused by volcanic eruptions and climate change. It also involved a complete breakdown of normal ocean chemistry as rising temperatures and acidification eliminated the organisms that normally consumed organic matter and produced oxygen. Without these decomposers, massive blooms of purple and green sulfur bacteria took over ocean surfaces, creating conditions that would have been lethal to most familiar forms of marine life. You can imagine the eerie beauty of seas that glowed purple and green with bacterial communities, the acrid smell of hydrogen sulfide drifting across ancient coastlines, the patient poisoning of water that had supported diverse ecosystems for millions of years. This oceanic chemistry breakdown may have been triggered by the massive Siberian Traps volcanic eruptions, which warmed the planet so dramatically that normal marine ecosystems simply couldn't function. The toxic oceans persisted for millions of years after the initial extinction event, preventing normal marine ecosystems from recovering and extending the crisis far longer than the volcanic eruptions that triggered it. The gentle swirl of bacterial communities in poisoned seas, the slow return of normal ocean chemistry as temperatures eventually cooled, the sobering reminder that ecosystem collapse can create self-perpetuating cycles that outlast their original causes. What other tipping points in ocean chemistry await in our warming world, and how quickly could familiar blue seas become something entirely different? You're witnessing the slow-motion collision that built the backbone of Europe as the Variscan orogeny, 400 to 300 million years ago, crumples continental edges together and creates the mountain ranges that would define European geography while establishing the perfect conditions for the vast coal swamps of the Carboniferous period. This continental collision occurred as the supercontinent Pangaea assembled, bringing together fragments that would eventually become parts of France, Germany, Britain, and other European regions. The mountain-building process created complex topography with inland basins, elevated highlands, and river systems that would channel water into the low-lying areas where coal-forming swamps could flourish. You can imagine the deep rumble of continents slowly grinding together at rates too slow for any organism to perceive, the patient uplift of mountain ranges that would channel rainfall and create new ecological zones, the quiet establishment of drainage patterns that would persist for hundreds of millions of years. The Variscan Mountains also influenced global climate by affecting atmospheric circulation patterns and creating rain shadows that contributed to the arid conditions in some regions while maintaining the humid conditions necessary for coal formation in others. Many of Europe's major mineral deposits formed during this orogeny as hot fluids circulated through fractured rocks. The gentle folding of rock layers that remember ancient seas, the patient erosion of mountains that once rivaled the Himalayas, the remarkable connection between ancient continental collisions and the coal that powered the Industrial Revolution. What other ancient mountain ranges sleep beneath familiar landscapes, holding memories of continental collisions we never witnessed? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift back 100 million years to the warmest period in Earth's last 500 million years, when global temperatures soared 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above modern levels and turned our planet into a greenhouse world where no ice existed anywhere, even at the poles. The mid-Cretaceous thermal maximum saw atmospheric carbon dioxide levels reach 4 to 6 times higher than today's concentrations, creating conditions so warm that tropical forests extended to within 15 degrees of both poles, and ocean temperatures in the Arctic reached 20 degrees Celsius. This extreme greenhouse state was maintained by massive volcanic activity from multiple large igneous provinces that pumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere for millions of years. You can imagine the gentle warmth of polar summers that never ended, the patient growth of tropical vegetation where modern tundra struggles to survive, the quiet establishment of ocean currents in a world without polar ice caps to drive circulation. Sea levels were over 200 meters higher than today, flooding vast areas of the continents and creating extensive shallow seas that supported diverse marine ecosystems. This thermal maximum also coincided with the evolution and initial radiation of flowering plants, which may have been better adapted to the high CO2 conditions than existing plant groups. The soft whisper of warm winds across ice-free polar landscapes, the gradual establishment of greenhouse conditions that lasted for millions of years, the remarkable reminder that Earth's climate system can sustain conditions far outside our modern experience. What lessons about climate stability and tipping points echo from this ancient greenhouse world to our rapidly warming present? You're walking through the aftermath of Earth's greatest mass extinction, 252 million years ago, as fungal communities explode across landscapes littered with dead plant and animal material, creating the fungal spike that marks one of the most dramatic ecological transitions in our planet's history. The end Permian extinction eliminated so many living organisms that vast amounts of organic matter accumulated faster than normal decomposer communities could process it, creating perfect conditions for fungi to dominate terrestrial ecosystems for the first time in Earth's history. Fossil spore records show that fungal abundance increased by orders of magnitude immediately after the extinction event, while normal plant and animal fossils nearly disappear from the rock record for several million years. You can imagine the gentle sprouting of mushrooms and other fungal fruiting bodies across landscapes carpeted with organic debris, the patient decomposition happening on a planetary scale as fungi process the remains of the Paleozoic world, the quiet preparation of soil that would eventually support the recovery of terrestrial ecosystems. This fungal dominance may have lasted for several million years, making it one of the longest periods of non-photosynthetic dominance in Earth's history since the evolution of plants. The fungi not only cleaned up the aftermath of extinction, but also helped cycle nutrients back into ecosystems and prepare the ground for the eventual recovery of plant communities during the early Triassic. The soft whisper of decomposition preparing the stage for renewal, the patient work of fungi transforming death into the foundation for new life, the remarkable reminder that even Earth's greatest catastrophes create opportunities for life's most humble recyclers. What other humble organisms wait in the wings of today's ecosystems? ready to inherit and transform whatever worlds our changes create. You're sailing through the Caribbean in October 1780 as the deadliest Atlantic hurricane in recorded history strikes during the American Revolutionary War, killing over 22,000 people and sinking entire fleets from multiple European powers. The Great Hurricane devastated Barbados, St. Lucia, and Martinique with winds estimated at over 200 mph, while storm surges reached heights of 25 feet. The hurricane struck at a crucial moment when British, French, Spanish, and Dutch fleets were maneuvering for advantage in the Caribbean theater of the Revolutionary War. You can almost feel the ships groaning under impossible winds, hear the prayers in multiple languages as crews faced nature's fury, witness entire naval squadrons disappearing beneath mountainous waves. The storm killed more people in 3 days than most battles of the era, and temporarily removed naval power as a factor in Caribbean warfare. The hurricane also destroyed sugar plantations that were the economic foundation of European colonial power, permanently altering the balance of wealth in the Atlantic world. What other storms have quietly rewritten the balance of power by eliminating entire fleets in a single night? Dear listeners, close your eyes and journey to May 526 CE as a massive earthquake strikes Antioch, the Byzantine Empire's third largest city, killing an estimated 250,000 people and marking the beginning of the Eastern Mediterranean's decline as the center of Christian civilization. Antioch had been one of early Christianity's most important centers, where followers of Christ were first called Christians. But the earthquake reduced this magnificent city to rubble in minutes. The disaster occurred during the reign of Emperor Justin I, when the Byzantine Empire was at its cultural and economic peak, making the loss even more devastating. You can imagine the morning calm shattered by deep rumbling, the collapse of marble columns and golden domes, the desperate search for survivors among ruins of churches and palaces. The earthquake damaged or destroyed most of the city's buildings, including the famous octagonal golden church built by Constantine. Emperor Justin I spent enormous resources trying to rebuild, but Antioch never regained its former prominence. The disaster marked a turning point when the Christian world center began shifting from the Eastern Mediterranean toward Constantinople and eventually Western Europe. How many other religious and cultural centers vanished because a few minutes of geological violence erased centuries of human achievement? Hey friends, settle into November 1st, 1755, as Europe's most devastating earthquake strikes Lisbon during morning mass on All Saints' Day, killing up to 100,000 people and forcing Enlightenment philosophers to confront the problem of evil in an age of reason. The earthquake struck at 9:40 a.m. when churches were packed with worshipers, causing massive casualties as religious buildings collapsed. Tsunamis up to 20 meters high swept away survivors who fled to the harbor, while fires burned for 6 days. You can almost hear the church bells that rang spontaneously as buildings swayed, smell the smoke that darkened European skies for weeks. Feel the theological crisis as people questioned divine justice. The disaster profoundly influenced Enlightenment thought, inspiring Voltaire's Candide and challenging optimistic philosophy about divine providence. The Marquis de Pombal's rational rebuilding of Lisbon with earthquake-resistant features became a model for Enlightenment urban planning. The earthquake also marked Portugal's decline as a major European power, as reconstruction costs drained resources that might have developed the empire. What other natural disasters have forced entire civilizations to reconsider their most fundamental beliefs about divine justice and human suffering? You're witnessing the massive earthquake and tsunami of July 21st, 365 CE, that devastates Crete and much of the Eastern Mediterranean, marking the beginning of the end for classical civilization on the island that had been home to Europe's first advanced culture. The magnitude 8+ earthquake lifted western Crete by 10 meters, while generating tsunamis that reached Alexandria, destroying the famous lighthouse and much of the ancient city. The disaster struck during the reign of Emperor Valens, when the Roman Empire was already struggling with barbarian invasions and internal conflicts. You can imagine the terror of coastal populations as the sea retreated before returning as walls of water. The collapse of ancient Minoan sites that had survived for millennia. The permanent changes to harbors and coastlines across the eastern Mediterranean. The earthquake and tsunami killed thousands and permanently altered the region's geography, making many harbors unusable and forcing the abandonment of coastal settlements. Archaeological evidence shows that many classical-era sites in Crete were abandoned after this disaster and never reoccupied. How many other islands that once hosted advanced civilizations now lie beneath the waves, victims of geological forces that leave no trace above water? Dear listeners, close your eyes and drift to the year 232 CE as Lake Taupo in New Zealand produces one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in human history, ejecting 120 cubic kilometers of material and creating atmospheric effects visible across the entire planet. The eruption was heard over 3,000 kilometers away and created pyroclastic flows that devastated an area larger than Rhode Island. Volcanic ash circled the globe, creating spectacular red sunsets that Chinese and Roman chroniclers recorded without understanding their distant New Zealand origin. You can almost see the initial explosion that reached the edge of space, feel the ground shaking across New Zealand's North Island, witness the formation of modern Lake Taupo in the eruption's aftermath. The eruption occurred in a sparsely populated region, but its atmospheric effects influenced global climate and may have contributed to crop failures and social upheaval in distant civilizations. The disaster created the landscape that would later become some of New Zealand's most fertile agricultural land. Modern Lake Taupo sits peacefully in the collapsed volcanic caldera, giving no hint of the violence that created this serene landscape. What other peaceful lakes around the world are actually sleeping supervolcanoes that could reshape global civilization with their next awakening? You're sailing the Mediterranean in 1347 as violent storms drive plague-infected ships off course, inadvertently spreading the Black Death to new ports and accelerating the pandemic that would kill 1/3 of Europe's population. Genoese trading ships fleeing the plague outbreak in Crimea were caught in severe storms that forced them to seek shelter in previously unaffected ports across the Mediterranean. These weather-driven detours brought infected sailors and cargo to Sicily, southern France, and other regions that might have remained plague-free for months longer. You can imagine the desperate crews battling mountainous waves while carrying invisible death, the relief of reaching unexpected harbors that would become tragedy for local populations, the ironic role of storms in accelerating history's most devastating pandemic. The tempests that scattered plague ships also disrupted normal trade routes, forcing infected vessels into smaller ports that lacked quarantine facilities. Weather patterns that winter were unusually severe, possibly related to the beginning of the Little Ice Age, creating the perfect conditions for rapid disease transmission. The storms that seemed like salvation for sailors became harbingers of doom for the ports that sheltered them. How many other pandemic outbreaks were accelerated or redirected by weather events that forced infected travelers to seek shelter in unexpected places? Hey friends, journey back to around 1600 BCE as the massive eruption of Santorini generates tsunamis that devastate Minoan Crete, ending Europe's first advanced civilization and leaving only archaeological mysteries for modern scholars to unravel. The Minoans had created a sophisticated maritime culture with elaborate palaces, advanced plumbing, and peaceful trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. The Santorini eruption, 4 times more powerful than Krakatoa, sent tsunamis racing across the relatively short distance to Crete at jet aircraft speeds. You can almost hear the deep rumble preceding the massive waves, see the elegant Minoan ships being swept inland by walls of water, witnessed the collapse of a Bronze Age paradise in a matter of hours. The disaster may have inspired Plato's story of Atlantis, as Greek oral traditions preserved memories of an advanced island civilization that disappeared suddenly beneath the waves. Archaeological evidence shows that many Minoan coastal sites were abandoned after this period and never reoccupied. The tsunami also disrupted Mediterranean trade networks, contributing to widespread Bronze Age collapse across the region. What other advanced civilizations disappeared so completely that we remember them only as myths and legends, until archaeologists prove the stories were true? You're standing on the prosperous streets of Galveston, Texas, on September 8, 1900, as the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history approaches, a Category 4 hurricane that will kill up to 12,000 people and end the city's role as the Wall Street of the South. Galveston was then America's third busiest port and one of the wealthiest cities per capita, built on a barrier island that residents confidently believed was protected by its sandy beaches. The hurricane brought 15-foot storm surges that swept across the entire island, destroying over 3,600 buildings. You can imagine the growing concern as barometric pressure dropped to record lows, the sound of wind that built from whisper to roar, the moment when the sea finally claimed a city that had grown too confident in its defenses. The disaster marked the end of Galveston's golden age, as shipping and commerce shifted permanently to Houston's inland port. The tragedy also led to one of engineering's great achievements, raising the entire city by up to 17 feet and building the famous Galveston seawall, the storm that taught America that no coastal city, however prosperous, is beyond nature's reach. What other cities built their fortunes by defying natural forces, only to learn that prosperity cannot purchase immunity from geological and meteorological reality? Dear listeners, settle into the story of January 23, 1556, when the deadliest earthquake in recorded human history strikes Shanxi province in China, killing an estimated 830,000 people and demonstrating how human settlement patterns can amplify natural disasters. The magnitude 8 earthquake was particularly devastating because the region's population lived in artificial caves carved into soft loess soil formations that collapsed instantly when the ground shook. These Yaodong cave dwellings housed millions of people in what seemed like earthquake-proof homes. But the loess formations turned out to be deadly traps when seismic waves arrived. You can imagine the false security of cave homes that had sheltered families for generations, the instantaneous collapse that gave no time for escape, the bewildering scale of loss that affected every family in the region. Contemporary accounts describe mountains changing shape and rivers changing course, while some hills collapsed entirely and new lakes formed overnight. The disaster led to changes in Chinese building practices and influenced traditional beliefs about the relationship between human activity and natural disasters. The earthquake occurred during the Ming Dynasty's golden age, creating a demographic catastrophe that affected Chinese development for generations. How many other traditional building techniques that seemed perfectly adapted to local conditions became death traps when rare but inevitable natural forces finally struck? Hey friends, if you love this series, don't forget to subscribe as we reach our final story about the day space weather introduced itself to human civilization. Your awakening on September 1st, 1859, as the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history, sends aurora displays as far south as the Caribbean, while demonstrating humanity's new vulnerability to space weather in the early electrical age. Astronomer Richard Carrington observed the solar flare that caused this storm, making it the first documented connection between solar activity and terrestrial effects. Telegraph systems worldwide experienced failures, fires, and the bizarre phenomenon of working without power as operators discovered their lines could run on auroral electricity alone. You can imagine the wonder and terror of seeing green and red curtains dancing across tropical skies, the crackling of telegraph wires carrying impossible currents, the recognition that Earth existed within the sun's extended atmosphere. Some telegraph operators received electric shocks, while others sent messages across continents using only the storm's induced currents. The event provided a preview of how space weather could affect our technological civilization, though few understood the implications for future electronics. Church bells rang spontaneously in Boston while compasses spun wildly as Earth's magnetic field fluctuated. The gentle dance of charged particles painting impossible auroras, the patient beginning of space weather science. As we conclude our journey through 100 moments when nature changed history, what other invisible forces shape our daily lives, connecting us to cosmic rhythms we're only beginning to understand.